This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod.
And he got busted with pot and a couple guns and a whole bunch of stuff in New Orleans. He was going to go to Angola, and for people who don't know, Angola was like the worst prison in the United States to go to, and that's where Burroughs was going to end up. Instead, he bails to Mexico, which kind of understandable, frankly. If I was like sitting there, I didn't have a career, I didn't have much going on, and suddenly I was facing 5 years in the worst prison in the country, I might drive a couple hundred miles to Mexico. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Easy. Oh,
Yeah.
no choice.
Yeah.
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 Listen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in the back of every American, middle-aged American man's mind is the flee to Mexico option.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, I'm going to read a little bit from the biography here. In September, this is 1948, I believe. It might be 1940. No, this is 1949. September 1949, Bill made a trip to Mexico City with Kells Elvins, and rented an apartment at Rio Lerma 26, preparatory to moving there with his family. His lawyer had warned him that there was every indication of an unfavorable outcome in his drug case, and he had decided to skip the country. He was delighted by Mexico City, telling Kerouac that a single man could live well on $2 a day, liquor included. Fabulous whorehouses and restaurants, a large foreign colony, cockfights, bullfights, every conceivable diversion. He told Allen that he wanted to live in Mexico City and, quote, don't see how I can afford to live anywhere else. Bill told Kerouac that he thought he would be in Mexico for some time, as the statute of limitations was 5 years. By October 1949, they were there. With the exception of relatively short visits, Burroughs would live outside the United States from then until 1974. So most of the time this beat thing is happening, Burroughs is not in the United States, right? Like On the Road is published, Burroughs is not in the United States. Howl is published, Burroughs is not in the United States. All the San Francisco stuff's happening, Burroughs is not in the United States. Totally on his own thing. Now, I'm going to read a little bit from this book, The Job, here. Just think it's interesting. It's a little bit on, what are the beyond just being able to get away with whatever you want down in Mexico, supposedly, what are some of the intellectual interests that Burroughs has about Mexico? And this book, The Job, is a series of interviews that Burroughs then edited into like more book-like content. Question: is your interest in Maya civilization connected with the expansion of consciousness which you try to stimulate in your reader? Answer: the ancient Mayans possessed one of the most precise and hermetic control calendars ever used on this planet, a calendar that in effect controlled what the populace did, thought, and felt on any given day. A study of this model system throws light on modern methods of control. Knowledge of the calendar was the monopoly of a priestly caste who maintained their position with minimal police and military force. The priests had started with a very accurate calendar for the tropical year, consisting of 365 days divided into 18 months of 20 days and a final period of 5 days, the Oab days, which were considered especially unlucky and in consequence turned out to be so. Now, reading a little bit later. Accordingly, the priests could calculate into the future or the past exactly what the populace would be doing, hearing, seeing on a given date. This alone would have enabled them to predict the future or reconstruct the past with considerable accuracy, since they could determine what conditioning would be or had been applied on any given date to a population which for many years remained in hermetic seclusion, protected by impassable mountains and jungles from the wave of invaders who swept down the central plateau of Mexico. There's every reason to infer the existence of a third secret calendar, which referred to conditioning and precise sequence applied to the populace under the cover of festivals, very much as a stage magician uses patter and spectacle to cover movements which would otherwise be apparent to the audience. Okay. Why do I read that now? Couple of reasons. One is Burroughs so far, the biography is just of this kind of drug-addled sort of maniac. But you have to, and there's another way of looking at this, that he's basically collecting information that will later fuel the writing career. And some of that stuff is about the criminal underworld. Some of that stuff is about drugs. Some of it's about sex. Some of it's about the Mayan civilization, right? It's from all over the place. It's, excuse me, his Harvard education. It's him being part of the international gay party circuit. It's all of these things. Um, so November 1949, Burroughs is in Mexico City, and he goes to the City College of Higher Studies, studying Mexican archaeology. And interestingly enough, notice this is happening while if he steps foot in Louisiana, he goes to prison. He's doing all this, getting his tuition and his books paid for, and a $75 a month stipend from the U.S. government from the GI Bill. Never served, never picked up a gun for his country, but he's basically living off of the largesse of the United States government. As
This is absolutely tactically appropriate. You have to
Mhm.
take every single dime you can get, every edge, every benefit, every little thing you can chisel back.
Right.
Pay your
No.
taxes, pay your taxes on time.
Yeah.
Pay yourself first. That's what the rich do. Pay yourself 1st.
Mhm.
The IRS will take an IOU. I mean, this is not
Mhm.
financial advice, but I mean, you can arrange payment plans. Just keep paying them. Pay
Yeah.
your taxes, beat it upstanding. But listen, when there's an advantage,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
take that.
Yeah. Bill
Yep.
Bill told Kerouac, he said, it's always good to keep your quote snout in the public trough.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All of these big companies are government companies. They're
Yeah.
Lockheed Martin. If you work for Lockheed Martin, you work for the government. I
Yeah.
refuse. You're
Yeah.
not fooling me. You're not fooling
Yeah.
anybody.
Right. No, for sure.
The public-private partnership is created. You work for the government. You make bombs for the government.
Well, and this is the kind of thing that I think Burroughs understood. Like it's all it's all chicanery, right?
Right.
It's all one big company. Yeah.
That's totally right. I mean, and they
Yeah.
figured out they pay you just enough so you can spend all your money at the company store, which is Amazon, which of
Mhm.
course is DARPA, and
Right.
Bezos is great. It's an internet company first. They just sold books. It's like incidental.
Yeah.
Everything's way funnier than it seems. Yeah, Facebook, and we're just plucky
Right.
and forget
Right.
about it. Yeah, no, it's all just yeah, dude. That is a fabulous word. The word of the day on Art of Darkness.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a thing we add to season 4. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
Word of the day is chicanery.
Chicanery. Yeah.
Chicanery. That's a
Yeah.
fine word.
It is a good word. Yeah.
That's a real good one. That's when
Yeah.
you play that at Scrabble and everybody knows you're there for
Yeah,
blood.
you're a real player. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, now one thing it's worth noting, early days in Mexico, Bill Burroughs is not on opiates. Now, during this period of his life, he is basically an alcoholic, though, drinking excessively every day, all day long. But he's not on junk. Now, that is until he comes into contact with some figures from the Mexican underworld, which anywhere he goes, he is going to know who the criminal underworld is. He ends up being friends with a guy who personally knows the woman who pushes all of the morphine in Mexico City. There was a bit I was going to read from this book, Wild Boys, but I might not just for the sake of time. Yeah, we'll skip that for now. We might come back to it. Now, he manages to get clean. So we're now in 1951. He's in Mexico City. Obviously, Billy Burroughs has been born. Mostly what they're doing down there is partying with other expatriates. You basically got up in the morning. This is what they would do. They would get up in the morning. They would go to this bar that was owned by Americans, and they would sit in a spot in the bar, and her daughter and Billy would play in the street, and they would sit there where they could see their kids and just get drunk all day. That was the order of the day.
I, I mean,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why not?
Right. Now, Bill, Burroughs is getting kind of crazy. Some things happen. At one point, he brandishes a gun at a cop and almost gets shot by this police officer. He gets uremic poisoning at one point, just from too much alcohol and not enough decent food. Joan is also screwed up. She's a full blown alcoholic. She's walking around in a cane with a cane because she had polio when she was a kid and it wasn't really ever properly treated. Um, More or less, their neighbors start to take care of the children, right?
Oh.
You just
Hmm.
start seeing these dirty kids out, and the neighbor women just start like making sure they're eating, that kind of
Hmm.
thing.
That's not a
Um,
good scene.
and Burroughs and Jones start sniping at each other.
Hmm.
He's falling apart, she's falling apart, she's becoming spiteful, resentful. There's also this thing of like he's not really heterosexual, so like is he able to give her the physical attention that she might be craving? Probably not. um
He also
uh
gives off weird vibes.
yeah, exactly. There's also something in here that he had a very small penis. I don't know
Oh.
how true that is, but
Hmm.
like very small.
Oh.
And
Oh.
so even if they did have relations, it might have never quite worked
Oh.
for her, you know?
Hmm.
I don't know.
He's got his own 2-inch knife.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Ayo.
Heyo.
Um, yeah. Now, in June of 1951, Burroughs takes his first trip to South America in search of yahe. Um, he it this trip, it's mostly he's trying to take this guy Lewis Marker, this young man Lewis Marker, on like a romantic getaway. Lewis Marker is like this straight kid who's friends with Burroughs. I think Lewis Marker's 21 when they meet. Burroughs is 37. And Lewis Marker basically agrees begrudgingly to have sex with Burroughs twice a week as long as Burroughs will finance Lewis Marker's day-to-day living. Uh,
Hmm.
anyway, they set out to Ecuador looking for yahe, ayahuasca. This is 1951. Very, very, very few Westerners have heard of ayahuasca at this point. But Burroughs had, and he decides to go searching for it. They go down there and they ask around for about 2 months, and as far as I know, they come up empty-handed. This first attempt. Now, shortly after this, we get into murder number two. Okay, now let me just read a bit,
Oh, this is harrowing.
right?
There's a bomb under the table. I'm waiting for it.
Yes, yes.
Man, I want to go back to Mexico City. I wonder how hard it would be to get a gun there, because I know we can get a shot glass.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how hard it would be to get
Hmm.
a gun. That's an interesting question that I don't necessarily feel like
Probably
I need
not
to
as
know the
difficult.
answer
Yeah,
to.
maybe we don't need
Yeah.
to speculate too loudly on something that we're going to post on YouTube. I'm already telling people to delay paying their taxes. Pay your taxes.
All right. Well, I'm going to read a extended bit here.
Uh,
I'm going to read a kind of an extended bit. Okay. Burroughs had arrived at Healy's. That's a friend of theirs. The guy who owns the bar that they would hang in all day. But this is about his Healy's apartment. Burroughs had arrived at Healy's about 20 minutes after Joan, after leaving off his knife. He had with him a check-made Star 380 automatic and his holster and a small overnight bag. It was a cheap gun, and he knew that it fired low. Healy was not present. He had presumably gone downstairs to work at the bar. Marker and Eddie Woods were there, though there was some dispute over whether or not Betty Jones was also there. So basically, there's some people there. They'd been drinking. They'd been drinking for 4 or 5 hours, all of them. For her part, Joan was a maintenance drinker. She took small sips regularly and got through between 1 and 2 bottles of tequila or gin a day. By 7:15 in the evening, she would have been drinking for 12 hours straight. Bob Addison and his 17-year-old Mexican girlfriend stopped by briefly early on, but he did not buy the gun if the sale was ever even brought up. Addison's friends discount the idea, saying he was always broke. Now, Marker and Eddie Woods were sitting on the sofa. Burroughs was sitting in the dining room, separated from Woods by an arm's length by the room division. Joan was sitting across from him with her drink at her side. Although Burroughs was not addicted at that time, he was not in a junk habit at this time. The conversation appears to have turned to the subject of how to get through a cure when there are so many ways of getting junk to threaten the addict's resolve. One idea Burroughs discussed was to retreat to an island that was reachable only by summer tides, and that there would be no way to leave until the water was once again high enough, by which time he would be long cured. Now, there's now when she says this, when he brought this up, I would go to an island and I would just be retreated there and I'd live off the land. Joan says something, we'd starve to death. You wouldn't be able to shoot. You'd be so shaky if you try to come off it, you'll shake. You won't be able to shoot anything. So apparently she's mocking his ability to fire a gun, right? And this is something people say, and I'm trying to give context. I'm not trying to run cover for Burroughs, but what I'm trying to point out is tensions had been mounting. She had been sniping at him. Their life is falling apart. They're two mid-30s alcoholics living in Mexico City with no prospects, no idea what's going to happen to them, right?
On a 12-hour drunk, and probably that's a daily thing. That has to be a daily thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't dip in and out of that.
Right.
Yeah, I've read.
Right. And so Burroughs says nonsense after provoked supposedly by her remarks. He said he didn't get the shakes and was still a good shot. It was then that he said, quote, put that glass in your head, Joni. Let me show the boys what a great shot old Bill is. Now, according to Eddie Woods, who's a guy who was just there, right? Quote, that's exactly what happened. So he did. And so she said with a giggle, and she turned her head. She was balancing the glass in her head, and she said, I can't watch this. You know I can't stand the sight of blood. I remember this vividly, and that's exactly what she said. And then it dawned on me, he was actually going to pull the trigger. So I started to reach for the gun as he actually aimed it. And then I thought, you better not, because if it goes off just when you reach it and it hits her. So I didn't grab it. And then bang, the noise. That's the first impression I had, was the noise. Next thing I knew, the next impression I had was that glass was on the floor, rolling around in concentric circles on the floor. Then I looked at her and her head was over to one side. Well, I thought, she's kidding, you know? That's the first thing you think. And then I heard Marcus say, Bill, I think you hit her. And then Bill said, no. And he started towards her, you know, and Marker got there first and I got over there too. And then I saw the hole in her temple, a little blue hole. And Burroughs jumped on her lap and he said, Joan. I mean, he was out of it and shocked that this happened. Again, to me, that's evidence it was absolutely an accident. He was shocked that he had hit her and he was trying to wake her up. This guy was out of it. Now,
so wait, so if he shot her in the temple, she must have been,
I think, like, she
at
turned.
an angle. She turned, yeah.
I think what it said was that she turned.
I mean,
if she couldn't. Yeah, she might have been turned to begin with because she said she couldn't watch.
Oh, right, she couldn't watch. Oh my God! I mean, if you hit her in the temple, like you'd think maybe up here you graze the skull and maybe you get lucky. Like, well, what caliber was it?
It was a 380.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's gonna. Yeah. I mean, it hits you there. It's it.
Yeah, you're done.
And I'm sure they weren't very far away. You know what I mean? It was probably whatever room you're in. It's probably to the wall across the way. You know, something like that. 8 feet, 10 feet, maybe 12.
Dude,
you know,
that is a nightmare. That is a day wrecker.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Quote, read a little bit more. Quote, the Red Cross received the phone call at about 7:30 p.m. and ambulance number 4 was dispatched to the apartment where the emergency personnel found Joan slumped in an easy chair with a wound in her forehead flowing. Now this says in her forehead flowing with blood, but she was unconscious but still breathing. It's unclear how long she survived at the Red Cross hospital. Some reports say an hour, others just a few minutes. In addition to the ambulance, the police arrived, of course, accompanied by a number of reporters whom they had presumably tipped off. Burroughs reached the hospital on foot shortly after Joan, followed by a pushing, jostling group of reporters. In his confused state, he was interviewed by Lieutenant Luis Hurtado in front of the reporters in the courtyard of the hospital, giving them a more or less accurate account of what happened. He said that he basically at first said that after drinking all day, he had tried to demonstrate his magnificent marksmanship and that he had placed a glass of liquor on the head of his wife, and aiming over the glass at a distance of 2 meters, he fired, but as a consequence consequence and result of the state of drunkenness in which he had found himself, he missed and injured the forehead of his wife with a bullet. Now, later he gets sort of wised up by a cokehead lawyer friend of his and, tries to get his story straight. I mean, at this point, you're just trying to not spend the rest of your life in prison, right? I guess. So here's a statement that he makes later. Burroughs does. Quote, I'm 37 years old. 3 days ago, I arrived in Mexico. They'd been there for months. 3 days I arrived in Mexico, accompanied by my wife, with whom I've been married for 5 years. She was a common law wife. We installed ourselves in this place in Colonia, Roma. At 3 p.m., I went to apartment 10 in 122 Monterey to visit my friend John Healy. Hours later, we were all drunk. I took my pistol from a valise and put it on the table. Then I picked it up again to demonstrate to those present how to handle it. And while I was playing with it, the shot was produced that killed my wife, who was seated before me. She fell to the floor and I thought she was playing a trick, but one of my friends informed me that she was hit. Then I lifted her up and seated her on an easy chair. All my friends left. After that, my wife was taken by persons from the Red Cross. I went to that institution to find out her condition. Later, from a friend of mine, I knew that Joan had died.
You can even hear in the language how he's already distancing himself from it. I understand it's like legally he's making like a case.
Yeah.
But oof. Wow.
Yeah.
The shot was produced or whatever. Like
Right. It's the same kind of stuff you see in news now whenever,
Sure.
somebody there's and you like I said, you can kind of understand it. I mean, the thing happened and you're trying not to spend the rest of your life in prison.
In Mexican
prison, right? And I do think here's my take coming away from this. I'm not trying to get him out of it. I don't think he intended to kill her. I don't think there was a conscious "I'm going to kill this bitch" in his head.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
I've never had that impression, and I especially don't have that impression now.
Yeah, I think it's crazy, drunken craziness. Things got weird,
Now there may have been some subconscious gnarliness to even do that.
Yep.
Like, and a lot of people will say the subconscious doesn't exist. Right. And then where does that leave us? No, I don't buy that either. But some people will say that. But it's sort of like, so who did it and what did it and why would you? And of course, I mean, I think we've all been drunk on, at one point or another. And the point is you lose your inhibitions.
Right.
The point is, and she's teasing you about your gun.
Right.
I'll show her. Yeah.
Right. And
I mean, and just the idea. And what if he had even like succeeded? It's still one of the stupidest things you could possibly do.
Oh,
it's
a firing a gun in your little apartment living room, like
and like where's ridiculous. The backstop and what are you doing?
No, the whole thing is ridiculous,
ludicrous.
And, right, and we've talked about this in our other Burroughs content, but Burroughs would come to feel as though he had been possessed by what he calls the ugly spirit. Now, at this point in his life, 1951, he didn't have that terminology. But over time, he came to understand. He came to ask the thing about the subconscious. He came to ask himself the same question, like, why did I shoot her? Like, really, like, fundamentally, why did I pick up the gun? Okay, how do you answer that question? Okay, how did I aim it? And then how did I not successfully shoot the glass 6 feet away? Like, even considering how stupid an idea it is to fire the gun in the first place, even a person who never shot guns could probably pull that shot off. Not maybe hitting the glass, but just not shooting her in the head. Right.
You just aim. I mean, aim as high as possible, I guess.
Right.
I mean, like,
and so he would ask himself these questions for the rest of his life.
Yeah. And you're just what a nightmare.
Right. And he comes to the point, and there's, sadly enough, like there's times when he's like in his 70s where friends will say that sometimes just randomly he will start crying and he'll just start saying Joan, 40, 50 years later. So
there's no coming back from that. I mean, you need Jesus. There's Jesus or nothing at that point.
Yeah.
It's always Jesus or nothing, Brad. But I mean that's some pretty serious business.
It's heavy.
It's very
And
cool Saint Michael rosary here.
no, it is
Very
light.
cool.
No, it is
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Whatever you think, I think we said this before in a previous Burroughs episode. It's like whatever you think of like demonic possession, uh, I think Burroughs is a good candidate for somebody who had it. You
Yep.
know, yeah,
Yep. Yep. I'll
yeah,
co-sign that.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
He's got the
and
demons.
yeah,
And he was like, and Mexico City is like, yeah, gnarly.
yeah,
It's one of those
yeah,
towns where there's some psychic energy there. There's some ectoplasm
yes,
coursing through the
yeah,
bowels of
yeah,
CDMX.
yeah. Yeah. Now I'm going to read a little bit of other people in their circle's opinion on what happened. I thought this was kind of interesting. Quote, um, though in no way redeems Burroughs' culpability, the idea that Joan was feeling suicidal was widely felt. Allen Ginsberg's impressions of Joan's state from his visit with Lucian Carr shortly before her death was that, quote, there was something scary about her, suicidal, just as she had said to Lucian, quote, how fast can this heap go? I think she said to Bill, shoot that off my head. There was a story I didn't read about Lucian Carr and Joan driving across country, and she was just like, faster, 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 like
Mm,
pushing it as
mm.
hard as she could. Um, uh, Continuing with Ginsburg, I always thought she had kind of challenged him into it, that it was sort of like using him, that she was in a sense using him to get her off the earth because I think she was in a great deal of pain. Ginsburg would always do his utmost to defend and excuse his friend, but his view was shared by a number of people who saw her at the time. Lucian Carr felt the same way. Quote, after Joan was killed, I remember thinking that she was much more the sender than Bill was, that the shooting was really her doing. Sender in Burroughs' sort of world is that there are people who can influence uh events with their mind, right?
That's
It becomes
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a in Twin Peaks, Agent Cooper at some point says, "I'm a strong sender."
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. In Naked Lunch, the Senders are a political party.
Mm,
And they're
mm,
like they have like a whole ideology about using this, right? Um,
mm.
Hal Chase, who basically disliked Burroughs and had been very close to Joan, told the biographer Ted Morgan, quote, she wanted to die and she offered Bill a chance to kill somebody. That William Tell's stuff was a sham. Her death was a put up thing to release Bill to let him commit, quote, the ultimate crime. He was childish about things like that. Joan gave her life to Bill. Now, okay. Now, let's hear what Burroughs has to say about it. Burroughs rejected all of this. Quote, Alan was always making it out as a suicide on her part, that she was taunting me to do this, and I do not accept that cop-out. Not at all. Not at all. Burroughs said he thought of Joan every day of his life. She was a permanent presence in his life. He took full responsibility for her death, other than serving prison time, right? Quote, that is to say, if everyone is to be made responsible for everything they do, you must extend responsibility beyond the level of conscious intention. Almost 40 years later, Burroughs explored the terrible idea that there might have been an unconscious desire to kill her. In The Black Rider, the casting of the Magic Bullet, an opera written by Robert Anton Wilson, Tom Waits, and William Burroughs in 1990, Burroughs wrote, quote, now a man figures it's his bullets, so he'll hit what he wants to hit, but it don't always work out that way. You see, some bullets is special for a single aim, a certain stag or a certain person, and no matter where you aim, that's where the bullet will end up. And in the moment of aiming, the gun turns into a dowser's wand and points where the bullet wants to go. Now,
That's some weapons grade cope there, Billy.
yeah.
You done fucked the dog. It does
Yeah.
not get worse than this.
Yeah.
You're a bad, bad, bad man.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
excuses, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's a fuck up. Like that's
Yeah.
like the
It's
ultimate, just like,
it's monumental. It's
yeah.
just incredible.
Yeah.
And at the same time, because of your masterful storytelling, strong sender Brad Kelly, I am somehow still pulling for him because we know he's a genius. He's also a genius.
Right.
Like he's
Right.
a monster and a genius.
Right.
Monster genius. Monster
Yeah.
genius.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the cut up here. I actually want to talk about two things. We're going to focus more on the Burroughs work for a minute here. You could dedicate an entire podcast episode just to the cut up technique. And fundamentally, what is it? You cut up a text and you recombine it to varying degrees of intentionality, right? Um, Burroughs is sort of the most well-known exemplar of this technique, but he didn't invent it. He actually credits T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, Dos Passos USA trilogy. Brian Geisen was already doing this in Paint. And what it started with was simply taking a sheet of text, a page of text, cutting it into four quadrants, and then rearranging those quadrants, right? Very simple cut up technique. Later became much more high resolution, cutting out individual words, individual phrases and sentences and recombining them. Now, many people think of Naked Lunch as a cut up, not a cut up book. It's actually not. The individual sections, you could argue it's a cut up because the order of the sections doesn't matter. But really, that isn't so much cut up as just the fact that Naked Lunch is not a novel. It's a it's a book of prose. It's short stories, sort of, loosely connected, but it's not a novel in terms of telling a contiguous story from beginning to end. Um, and he hadn't even discovered, quote unquote, discovered the cut up technique when that was written. Um, I think though, it can be really easy to say because some of the cut up stuff is kind of unreadable. Um, or it's hard to read more than maybe a couple of pages. Um, I think it's important to point out that Burroughs was fairly intentional, and I don't think his project was separable from killing Joan. And I'm gonna start trying to explain what I mean here. So I'm gonna read a little bit from the bio, and this is Burroughs talking about the cut up technique. Um, let's see, 3, 4. Um, okay, so let's see. Da, 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 da. You know what? Actually, I'm going to skip no, here we go. Quote, Burroughs and Geisen had now extended cut-ups beyond tapes and collage and into the realm of personal relations, right? This is how far the cut-up stuff goes. It's not just about text, it's photos, it's video, it's audio, and then it's literally within your life, right? Burroughs now suspected that the entire fabric of reality was illusory and that someone or something was running the universe like a soundstage with banks of tape recorders and film projectors. He was determined to find where the control words and images were coined. He was using cut-ups in an attempt to backtrack the word lines to find out where and when the conditioning had taken place, and more importantly, who was responsible. Suspicion fell on Time Magazine's enormous newspaper clipping morgue and the files of the FBI and the CIA, but they were more likely to be the source material for control, not the masters of it. Ultimately, Burroughs, he takes the cut-up thing is, the way that I see it is he's trying to do two things, and maybe he's telling himself one thing and subconsciously doing the other. In the one hand, you have to remember, and we talk about this, if you go back to our Dark Room episode with Matt Pegas, we talk about this quite a bit. Burroughs is using cut up as an attempt to jostle loose the control that language has on us as human beings, right?
I will say that I have had in the throes of certain substances, let's just say at actually extraordinarily low points and sort of at high points too. Now that I think about it, I mean, these are weird states to sort of think back to.
Yeah.
I have had an acute awareness of the tyranny of the language where it would be wonderful to be able to escape not just English, but language itself.
In general. Yeah. And this is one thing you have to understand. I think about he's doing. He's literally trying to like break it. Like he's thinking like if you twist it and bend it and move it around enough, maybe you can like literally break the shackles of language off of you somehow. Now, did he accomplish this? Well, maybe he did for himself for brief moments. I don't know. But that's one thing he's trying to do. Now, here's another thing that he's trying to do. And think about again him shooting Joan, and he's trying to accept responsibility for it, but he's also has this thing where he's like, well, I didn't intentionally stand up and say, I'm going to kill her and then shoot her. Some subliminal process was happening there that in his mind, this ugly spirit thing. But think about partially what the cut up is doing is he it's a means for showing you the subconscious selection mechanisms of your mind, right? You take this text and you randomly rearrange it, and something else emerges. And I think one thing he was trying to do is that would provide a lens or provide some resolution on this how the subconscious is choosing things. It's sort of like tarot in a way, where you like randomize this process, and then there's some kind of selection happens or projection happens, and you're able to see below your conscious mind. Um, I think
Right.
that's definitely what he's trying to do.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
form of magic.
and I think he's literally doing this
And he's
because
conscious of it. Like
Mhm.
yeah.
I think he in part is doing this because he's trying to figure out why he killed Joan.
Damn.
Right. I think that's partly what this whole experiment is about. And where this gets even heavier is later in his life, he starts, like in his 70s, he starts doing what has been termed shotgun art. And this is very loosely termed because it refers to a lot of different things. Um, okay, so at some point in Lawrence, Kansas in the 80s, he's an old man, right? He starts shooting at cans of paint and spray paint against plywood, all manner of experiments with stencils and things, right? But shooting something is a big part of this. Um, and he's weirdly enough, these paintings start to sell very, very well, which is very weird. In the last years of his life, he's making way more money selling shotgun art than he is from his books, which is bizarre. Um, uh, and I want you to
Shotgun art.
shotgun
Okay.
art. Yeah.
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 Fun.
Now some of them are kind of cool looking, but
Yeah,
like,
it's cool.
is it
Sure.
art? Like, I don't know. But let
They're
me
just
read a
trying to
little
get
bit.
old Billy murder your wife paid.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. No.
Now
I'd buy
let
one.
me.
I'd buy one.
I mean, at a reasonable price, it'd be something kind of
Yeah,
cool to have.
if I had a cabin that was already haunted, I'd
Yeah,
buy one
right,
for the
right,
haunted
right,
cabin. I'm
right,
not buying
right,
it from a kid's room.
right. No, no, no. And apparently he would shoot like he'd shoot this plywood, and sometimes he would stare at like the wound in the plywood for a long time, right? Uh,
Wee.
Yeah. Now, quote, his concern was to see what the painting had revealed. He saw the paintings as a gateway to the realm of the unconscious and the imagination. He was looking for figurative elements. He was able to identify faces and people in the paint. Quote, some absolutely recognizable as portraits of certain people. If he particularly liked one of the faces that emerged, he sometimes had it photographed so he could use it again. The photographer would have to see the face before they could photograph it because Burroughs was very specific about which bits of the painting he wanted. He might use a face from a real red picture and another red picture, or make collages of a number of pictures or of all possible combinations. There was a big failure rate. Very often, nothing emerged. Whereas Picasso was using art as a form of negotiation between the real world and himself as an individual, Burroughs was using it to penetrate deeper into himself. Okay, now let me read another quick little bit. Um, Quote, Burroughs had always seen the artworks, the shotgun art, as a door to the spirit world, an interface to another dimension of memory, psychic experience, and place. Like his dreams, his paintings gave him stories. Quote, the paintings write, they tell and foretell stories. Now the pictures are moving, laughing, and talking, screaming, changing, but it is movement in another dimension, not some physical miracle of moving paint. Burroughs' use of his paintings and his previous use of Brian Geison's paintings for the same purpose as a port of entry to another world of spirits removes him somewhat from the general contemporary art world. Um, it- Here's the point why I'm bringing this up. I literally think in the end of his life, he might not even be conscious that he was doing this. I think he thought through this shotgun art, if he shot enough times at this plywood and spilled enough paint, that he might be able to actually see the face of the thing in him that killed Joan. I think that's what he was trying to do,
Jeez, man.
right? So here's the question. Burroughs didn't serve any time in prison. Did he get away with it?
Well, I mean, the dude
You know,
should have gone. I mean, he should have
yes,
done time.
I agree. I agree. I
Yeah,
agree. I
I
guess
think
what I'm
maybe
trying
not.
to
I mean,
like,
it should have been maybe. I don't know how they do things in Mexico. I understand your point, Brad. You're
right,
making the point that, like, yes, of course he was tortured, and of
right.
course he suffered for it.
Yeah.
But just going to Tangiers,
Right. And partying for
right,
the next
and
20 years. Yeah.
partying
Yeah. Yeah.
and try,
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
fair. I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds like a manslaughter type
Right.
charge to me. I'm not a lawyer,
Yeah. Yeah.
but right. I mean, and I don't know how many years, and I don't know Mexican law, but he
Mhm.
definitely got away with it in the strict sense. I
He did.
mean,
Right. Right.
yeah,
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 absolutely. And in the legal sense, he
sure,
certainly got
sure.
away with it. I want to
Much like we get away with this podcast.
That's right. That's right. And I'm haunted
No,
by guilt
I,
afterwards.
yeah, unironically, yes. And nobody's stopped us yet. Can you believe? I
No,
can
not
hardly
yet.
believe it.
Not
Hardly
yet.
believe it.
Yeah, he basically gets away. He does serve like 2 weeks in jail. It's possible somebody was paid off, but ultimately he does kind of slink out of the whole thing. I think it's a suspended sentence or something like that. Ultimately is the resolution. Um, he he not too long after the Joan thing, he goes back looking to South America looking for yahe, for ayahuasca. Um, yeah, he gets a 2 year suspended sentence is what the ultimate legal resolution is. And this is probably partially his brother had come down, I think, to help out. I think some money changed hands. Burroughs
Sure.
had friends within the criminal underworld, and sometimes the criminal underworld and the legal world
Hmm.
blur into each other a little more than one might think.
I'm hearing this for the first time. Slow down.
Right.
What are you
Right.
trying to say, Brett? Are you saying
Right.
all power is simply power and
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
it's kind of porous and it operates across
Right.
boundaries?
Yeah,
Yeah.
international
Hmm.
lines, right?
Are
Institutional
you telling me
lines.
it's all the friend enemy distinction all up and down
Yeah,
the line? Is that what
yeah,
you're telling me?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
It sounds like
yeah.
he went through the legal system. I mean, and he didn't stand trial or anything. It was more just like
Yeah, no, no, he
it was
was
just
in
like
he was in jail for 2 weeks.
okay.
And yeah, then
And it's like,
then
whoops, you
right,
send somebody some money. This dude accidentally shot his wife. It's an accident.
right, right,
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if it had happened in St. Louis, it'd be a different situation.
right,
He would have had to
right,
flee the
right.
country.
Yeah, and in
That's
fact, in fact, the story was such like an outrage that his parents moved from St. Louis to Palm Beach, Florida. Like it was just like we
right.
can't. Your
Yeah,
son's like in a drunken weird thing, like killed his
yeah.
wife.
Yeah,
Like,
you're gonna have to stop wearing loafers. You're gonna have
right,
to start
yeah,
getting
yeah.
serious.
Moat had to put some
Yeah,
tennies
Moat
on
had to
instead
put
of his
on some
some boots.
some Florsheim shoes. And
Yeah.
Palm Beach, nobody gives a shit. They're just like,
Right,
that's
right,
okay.
right. Yeah,
All right.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
and now at this time, there was kids involved too, right? So Joan's
Mm,
daughter, who wasn't Burroughs's daughter, that girl goes and lives with Joan's family, her parents or something, and then Billy Burroughs Jr. goes and lives with Moat and Laura in Florida, and Bill's like no longer a dad now at this point.
mm.
Um,
What a
like I said,
sad story. My God.
yeah, yeah. Now, like I said, he went down and he searched in Ecuador and South America for yahe. He ends up doing this a lot more intensely than he did the time before. He meets Richard Evans Schultes. For people who know the history of 20th century ethnobotany, you will know this name. This is the godfather of modern ethnobotany. Um, we still might not even know Westerners still might not even know about ayahuasca if it wasn't for Richard Evans Schultes. He was a Harvard, he was like a serious academic, right? Um, and Schultes gave Burroughs, who remember, Burroughs is still a Harvard man. Despite all of this, he's still a Harvard man.
Once a
Um,
Harvard man, always a Harvard man. Murder your
right,
wife, Harvard man.
right, right.
Sleep with 13-year-old boys in Tangiers,
Harvard man.
Harvard man.
Right, right, right.
Once a
Now,
Har Jeffrey Epstein calls he the Epstein was not a Harvard man, but my understanding is that he spent time there.
I
Didn't
think
they
he
give
was
him
an
an office?
honorary. I think, yes, they
Yeah.
did. Yeah. I think
Jeffrey
he was an
Epstein,
honorary Harvard man.
Harvard man.
Yeah. I think they
Yeah.
liked the cut of his jib so much that they
I
were like,
think that they did. Come
yeah,
on in, Jeffrey.
yeah. What's a degree? Come on in.
What the water's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, yeah. Right.
Harvardman.com. They're all too fancy. Too fancy. Hmm.
Yeah. Now, Burroughs actually ends up on an expedition with Richard Evans Schultes. So like he's literally like now he's like literally part of a ongoing expedition. You can read more about this. The letters Burroughs was writing Ginsberg at this time, it's called the Yahe letters, is published in a book. Um, he does end up drinking on this trip. He drinks ayahuasca a few times. He sort of quote unquote overdoses once, which um overdose isn't really an appropriate word, but that's okay. Uh, he another time he kind of doesn't do enough to have an effect. He languishes in Lima, Peru for a while at this time, sleeping with underage boys like a disgusting piece of shit. And then finally he has the actual
I
he
still
has
like
the
him more than
actual
Carlos Castaneda.
what's that? I
I
know
still like him more than
somehow
Carlos
I don't
Castaneda.
I don't
I
get
was
it.
really, really harsh on Castaneda. Aren't we
Yeah.
doing a dark room? We're doing a dark room, right?
We've got one coming up. Yeah, yeah,
Okay, I
yeah.
will. I promise I'll go in more open-minded about
Fair
Castaneda.
enough. Well, this is, talking about Burroughs is like, this is always tricky for me because I find the Burroughs work really interesting and captivating and unusual and I like it. And then like you read the stuff in his life and you're like, dude, like what is wrong with you? Like, you know, like I also think like maybe the world would have been a better place if he would have just like OD'd the first time he did morphine. You know, I'm not sure, right? Like anyway, here's him describing here's him describing when the time he really had the Yahe experience. Quote, Yahe is space-time travel. The room seems to shake and vibrate with motion. The blood and substance of many races, Negro, Polynesian, mountain mongrel, desert nomad, polyglot, Near East, Indian, and new races as yet unconceived and unborn, combinations not yet realized, passes through your body. You make migrations, incredible journeys through jungles and deserts and mountains, stasis and death in closed mountain valleys where plants grow out of your cock and vast crustaceans hatch inside you and grow and break the shell of your body. Across the Pacific in an outrigger canoe to Easter Island, the composite city, Near Eastern, Mongol, South Pacific, South American, where all human potentials are spread out in a vast silent market. So if you've ever wanted to do Yahe, that's the experience you may have. Now, the next big chapter in Burroughs' life is Tangiers, 1954. Burroughs lands in Tangiers. Within a few months, he's finding himself within we talked a bit, I think, about this in a previous Dark Room, or maybe the original Burroughs episode on what Tangiers was like. It was a free-for-all in the early 1950s. It was sort of run by a consortium, and sometimes a consortium means that nobody's really running anything. Uh,
Yeah, that's so fun, dude. Why can't we have consortiums anymore?
right,
Right? Like
right.
we're all so alienated and atomized. What's stopping us? Like I imagine for Art of Darkness in the future, man, like other podcasts have done this. We grow to a certain point, you get a budget and you create the Art of Darkness podcast network
Yeah, yeah.
and coach some other people who want to have a show and help
Mm,
produce their show and bring them
mm.
in and then start to cross pollinate and everything. I mean, right? We kind of have the podcast party circuit.
Yeah, yeah,
We're not
yeah.
we're not a bunch of homosexual old money Hungarians in the
Not
podcast
not
party
yet
circuit.
anyway.
Right, not yet, right. But for all we know, there are. Like, what do we really know about Matt Pegas? What do we really know about Dan Baltic,
Yeah, they're
the
nice,
show's
intelligent
lawyer?
men.
They're
Yeah, I don't
lovely,
know.
but I mean, we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know about their Hungarian roots, right? But I'm serious about this. Like, we got to really bring like consortiums back. Like, I think
Mm,
that's a good idea. Yeah, the
yeah,
Art of
yeah.
Darkness podcast network, circa 2028.
Mm,
We're gonna. I have a feeling in the
yeah.
distant future there could be other shows that could be
I
launched.
think we should buy a like a abandoned oil rig out in the ocean somewhere,
Oh, oh,
get satellite internet going out there
mm-hmm.
and just
Yeah.
start a little micronation.
Okay. All right. Who a micronation on
Yeah,
an oil rig?
something like that.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
It's I
yeah.
don't know if it sounds cold. It sounds
Well, it could
dangerous.
be in the Caribbean though,
It could be
It
in the
could be off
Caribbean.
the
There
coast of
are
Venezuela or something.
hurricanes and things.
Yeah,
Yeah. We'll have
yeah.
to figure out how to
Well,
pilot a helicopter.
right, right, right. Well,
I
that's the
mean,
first step. Yeah.
obviously. This is great. I love when the episodes turn into production meetings.
Okay, so Tangiers. Um, just suffice it to say, it was being run by basically 8 different countries, and nobody was really running the show. What ended up happening, it was kind of anarchy. A lot of the laws that were applied in other countries sort of didn't really apply anymore. And so you had a bunch of like bohemian expats who were into drugs or were into, having sex with other dudes. They ended up kind of filtering down there. Burroughs very quickly ingratiates himself into the expat community. Paul Bowles, particularly, he's sort of the biggest name down there. And for people who don't know Paul Bowles, The Sheltering Sky is a brilliant novel. It's amazing. I would highly recommend it. Um, Burroughs gets a regular boyfriend down there, a Spanish kid around the age of 18 or 19 named Kiki. Uh, Apparently, this is like a nickname for Henrique. Uh, Kiki is not gay, but he relies on Burroughs for money. So again, Burroughs has got this thing where he basically pays for the kid's life and they have sex sometimes. Um, Interestingly enough, Burroughs, despite his penchant for young men at this time in the mid 50s, he expresses in a letter to Ginsberg his disgust for another expat, this guy David Woolman. This guy David Woolman has a predilection for very young boys and keeps like a houseboy of 13 years old, and Burroughs is repulsed by this. So take that for what it is. I don't know. I don't know what to make of any of this. Kiki would say that Bill could be difficult to live with. And eventually, let's just fast forward on that part. Eventually, September 1957, Kiki leaves Bill. So Bill's with him for like 2 years in Tangiers. Kiki leaves Bill to go with a Cuban singer in a very similar arrangement to what he had with Burroughs. This Cuban singer who's gay, who's got a lot of money. Kiki's going to live with him, sleep with him sometimes, and then sort of live off his largesse. Kiki winds up in bed with a girl, 1957, and this Cuban singer stabs him to death. So this is not good. Kiki shows up in Burroughs' work like up into the 80s. Sometimes you'll see the name Kiki will show up, and he's referring to this paid boyfriend he had
Just
in
an
the 50s.
incredible panoply of names. Kiki, Moat,
Right.
June.
Right. Yeah.
Was it June?
Yeah. Joan.
Or Joan?
Yeah.
Joan, Kiki,
Yeah.
Ivy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Who
Yeah,
else?
great.
Incredible.
Kells. Owens.
Kells.
Yeah. Lucian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lucian. What?
Yeah.
Who are these people? I feel like they're like an alternate society.
Right.
It's like next. They're out there still, dude. We
Yeah.
are. It's making me feel real basic.
Right. Exactly. I'm nowhere near as, I don't know if sophisticated is the word, but like
Rad.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rad.
Heaven.
Like the same nail is like a name is like a nail of some kind. Like what's named after a fastener? Like what are we talking about here?
Sure.
Yeah. Now Burroughs found something else in Tangiers, and this would be a little drug called Eucadol. Now, Eucadol is essentially Eucadol was dihydroxycodone, a morphine substitute made by Merck as a painkiller, but they found that it was, whoopsie daisy, euphoric, an unfortunate side effect that stopped them manufacturing it. It was made from codeine with its strength increased 6 times by dehydration. It was short acting, with the high only lasting 3 or 4 hours, which made it particularly addictive as the euphoria made the user want more. According to Bill, quote, it had a great sort of lift like a combination of cocaine and morphine. By the beginning of April, I believe this is 1955 or 1954, Burroughs was shooting Eucadol every 4 hours. Now, he had intended, when he told somebody when he moved to Tangiers that his intention was to steep himself in vice. That was the whole point he was going to Tangiers. Now, whether he intended to very rapidly become a shooting 4 hours a day codeine addict, who knows? But um, he eventually does kind of pull himself out of this, and he's starting to write. By mid 1955, he's starting to write down the routines. Oh, by the way, he published Junkie in 1953 with the help of Allen Ginsberg. He published that under the name William Lee. It was a trashy paperback that you would find at like a dime store, but it was a published book of his. 1955, he's starting to write routines that will make up Naked Lunch. And let me read you one of the most famous Naked Lunch routines. This is called, quote, the talking asshole routine. So if you got kids in the room, maybe usher them out the door first for a couple minutes. Quote, did I ever tell you about the man who taught his asshole to talk? His whole abdomen would move up and down, you dig, farting out the words. It was unlike anything I ever heard. This ass talk had a sort of a gut frequency. It hit you right down there like you got to go. You know, the old colon gives you the elbow and it feels sort of cold inside, and you know, all you have to do is turn loose. Well, this talking hits you right down there, a bubbly, thick, stagnant sound, a sound you could smell. This man worked for a carnival, you dig, and to start with, it was like a novelty ventriloquist act. Real funny, too, at first. He had a number he called the Better Ol'. That was a scream, I tell you. I forget most of it, but it was clever. Like, oh, I say, are you still down there, old thing? Nah, I had to go relieve myself. Anyway, after a while, the ass started talking on its own. He would go in without anything prepared, and his ass would ad lib and toss the gags back at him every time. Then it developed sort of teeth, like little raspy, incurving hooks, and it started eating. He thought this was cute at first and built an act around, but the asshole would eat its way through his pants and start talking on the street, shouting out it wanted equal rights. It would get drunk too and have crying jags. Nobody loved it and wanted to be kissed, same as any other mouth. Finally, it talked all the time, day and night. You could hear him for blocks screaming at it to shut up and beating it with his fist and sticking candles up, but nothing did any good. And the asshole said to him, it's you who will shut up in the end, not me, because we don't need you around here anymore. I can talk and eat and shit. After that, he began waking up in the morning with a transparent jelly like a tadpole's tail all over his mouth. This jelly was what the scientists call undifferentiated tissue, which can grow into any kind of flesh on the human body. He would tear it off his mouth, and the pieces would stick to his hands like burning gasoline jelly and grow there, grow anywhere on him. A glob of it fell. So finally, his mouth sealed over and the whole head would have been amputated spontaneous. Did you know there's a condition that occurs in parts of Africa and only among Africans where the little toe amputates spontaneously? Except for the eyes, you dig. That's one thing the asshole couldn't do was see. It needed the eyes, but nerve connections were blocked and infiltrated and atrophied, so the brain couldn't give orders anymore. It was trapped in the skull, sealed off. For a while, you could see the silent, helpless suffering of the brain behind the eyes. Then finally, the brain must have died because the eyes went out, and there was no more feeling in them than a crab's eyes on the end of a stalk. So that is the talking asshole routine.
The talking asshole routine from Billy, and there it is. There's that again, that kind of vaudevillian and but it's absurd and
right.
Dark,
it's absurd and dark
nasty,
and it's gross and repulsive,
scatological.
Right. It's all those things.
Candid and honest, and
but also like kind of clever. Like the turns it takes is like, oh, then it starts like the talking, oh, this guy makes his asshole talk. And then like by the end, it's like this thing that's taken over his life. It's really, it's like the most screwed up Twilight Zone episode ever, right? Mm-hmm. Or something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Burroughs was finding, quite a bit of inspiration in this Tangiers period. He does at some point get clean off Eucadol. This time he gets clean. He goes to England and takes the apomorphine cure with this guy named Dr. Dent. Burroughs would always claim that this was the closest thing that ever worked for his addiction. There's a lot of research to indicate apomorphine doesn't do anything. Who knows? I suppose it's one of those things that's very much case by case. Something that's going to help one person get through it is maybe not going to work for another person. I think, whatever the case, Burroughs managed to get off for a while. Now, Burroughs clean doesn't mean clean. He's drinking every day And most of Naked Lunch, which is written in this Tangiers period in the mid 1950s, most of Naked Lunch is written under the influence of something called Majoon, which I mentioned at the beginning of the pod. Majoon is basically edible marijuana like candy or pastry, and sometimes it has datura. And how much of the stuff that Burroughs used had datura, it's hard to say, but basically throughout the entire 1950s, Burroughs is stoned on edibles the entire time. Okay. So, including, the entire writing of Naked Lunch. Um, now there's a little bit I want to read about the writing of Naked Lunch, though, that I thought was interesting. Quote, Dave Woolman, who lived next door, and Eric Gifford, who was on the other side, said they could hear Burroughs' quote, strange, wild laughter through the doors. He would sit hunched over his typewriter, pounding the keys furiously, hair tousled, often cackling with laughter at his own routines, throwing the pages onto the floor as they came out of the carriage, where the sea breeze would sometimes blow them out into the garden through the open door. I just love that image, just like not even really caring about the pages, sort of. Quote, Paul Bowles described the scene, quote, the litter on his desk and under it on the floor was chaotic, but it consisted only of pages of Naked Lunch at which he was constantly working. When he read aloud from it at random, any sheet of paper he happened to grab would do. He laughed a good deal, as well he might, since it is very funny. But from reading, he would suddenly go into a bitter conversational attack upon whatever aspect of life had prompted the passage he had just read. The best thing about Bill Burroughs is that he always makes sense and he is always humorous, even at his most vitriolic. Um, so yeah, interesting.
Yeah, his style of humor is, what would you even call it?
Yeah,
Black humor?
I mean, it certainly has its black humor elements. I mean, one of his funniest bits, and I don't have it right at hand, in my opinion, is there's a Dr. Benway bit. Dr. Benway is this character he came up with who's like a mad medical doctor. And Dr. Benway will do like insane things in the operating room. Like there's one where he's like, "Oh, there's no time. They're doing surgery like in a toilet in a bathroom stall. There's no time." And he's cleaning the instruments in the toilet, and he's always doing weird experiments, and it's super dark. But there's something about like how dark it is that makes it funny somehow. It like crosses some threshold into absurdity that makes it hilarious. I don't
There's
know.
something very theatrical about him too.
Oh
He's like
yeah.
he's setting up these like little scenes and they
Yes.
play out and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think the vaudeville, well, there's one, and I didn't point this out. There was one moment that I think was super influential on Burroughs' development as an artist. When he would go see movies like in the 1920s when he was a kid, they would have little stage plays between film strips or something. And he said he saw one time this 40-year-old man, something-year-old man dressed up like a cowboy, and the guy was doing the whole act, but he could see in the eyes that the guy was like incredibly embarrassed and depressed that he was this grown man playing cowboy to a bunch of kids. And
Mm.
I think there's something in that to Burroughs like sensibility, right? This like crazy wackadoo, like slapsticky kind of thing, but like this dark absurdity underneath it
Yeah,
somehow.
and that's a trope now. I mean, you think about Baskets or you think
Hmm.
about the magician character in Arrested Development. What is
Hmm.
it? The one of the brothers.
Yeah,
Uh
yeah.
yeah, it's just that pain, that kind of hidden pain behind the eyes of the person who has to be the center of attention.
Hmm.
Just it's a very thin line.
Right, right,
Yeah, and
right.
how do you handle that even as a great actor?
Hmm.
I've been getting ready. I'm writing this article about Werner Herzog for a thwart and about his memoir. And uh, there's that great short film. Have you seen this, Brad? This is a tangent, but have you seen this? Werner Herzog eats his shoe.
I have, yeah, years
Yeah,
ago now. Yeah,
yeah. I
yes.
mean, and he talks about how the filmmaking, and I think writ large, he almost kind of means storytelling, but it means he's talking
Mhm.
about filmmaking makes you into a clown.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's that sad anyway, so Burroughs
Right.
as sad clown is an interesting
I
idea.
think there's an element of that too. But I think there's also something like he has like characters he has in Naked Lunch there's a bit about the county clerk, which is a very like almost Kafka-esque passage, except if Kafka had ever run into like a deep South bureaucrat. And it's very funny, but like underneath it is like this just like at the same time it's like this grotesque oppressive racism. And yet Burroughs is like he's not co-signing any of that, but he's somehow making it it's hard to say explain how he's even doing. He's sort of making it funny. He's making how dark that person is and their lack of self-awareness about it funny somehow. And it's not even that it takes the sting out of it. It just points out how absurd everything is in a way. Yeah. One thing I do want to say about Burroughs writing, just this quick quote, when they're putting together Naked Lunch, he says to Burroughs, or in a letter he writes to Burroughs, quote, "How can I write a novel? I can't and won't. The novel is a dead form, rigid and arbitrary. I can't use it. The chapters form a mosaic with the dream impact of juxtaposition like objects abandoned in a hotel drawer, a form of still life." So, why didn't Burroughs actually write a proper novel? He didn't think there was any point in writing a proper novel. And it's not the way his brain worked. Um, I don't 100% agree with him, but I don't 100% disagree with him either. Uh, okay, 1957. Burroughs is in London for a while. He's written the word horde that most of all these early books come out of, but he hasn't actually published Naked Lunch yet. Um, this is the period I talked about in the beginning. That's right. I already talked about this part when we folded this part in this 1957 period when he is in London and doing magical practices with Brian Geisen in the Beat Hotel in Paris in 1958. Um, I think one thing that's interesting that I learned in reading the Burroughs biography is you start to see the book Naked Lunch and the work that immediately comes out of the word horde as something that Burroughs was sort of summoning in the years leading up to it. He's sort of building himself, maybe not even intentionally, into the person who can bring this thing into life. Um, a person who was uh, perhaps more concerned with formalities artistically would have tried to make it into a proper novel of some kind, would have tried to organize it in a more deliberate fashion. I think he was sort of willing to allow it to be like dreamlike and fluid and moving from one thing to another. Um, and
It's
I think
wonderful because he is inspirational in the sense that like none of this is commercial. None of this.
no,
It's such a crazy fluke that any of this that this is on the shelf at Barnes and Noble.
right.
It's insane.
Right. It is. It
Yeah.
really is. It doesn't make any sense. And there's a reason nobody teaches this thing. Like, what would you even talk about in a way? Like, it's like I think it's worth reading, but like it's hard to yeah, you don't go into it and do any of the normal literary analytical stuff. It all kind of falls off. It kind of rolls off the back of it somehow. Yeah. Um, Now part of Naked Lunch gets published in Black Mountain Review in I think 57 or 58, and then some of it gets put in the Chicago Review, a student-run journal out of the University of Chicago. When that happened, this actually caused the University of Chicago administration to start bring in basically start to censor upcoming issues, and all but one editor of the magazine resigned. Basically, Burroughs publishes in this journal, and all but one editor ends up resigning because of how much of a stir this causes at the University of Chicago. Um, when another piece of Naked Lunch came out in a magazine called Big Table, one of those University of Chicago editors started this magazine called Big Table. There was suddenly a major issue. And I just want to read this bit because it ties into another subject we have talked about on the pod. Um, quote, um, and there it might have ended with Naked Lunch being in Big Table, except for a surprise intervention from an unlikely source. August Derleth, the first publisher of H.P. Lovecraft, read a review copy of Big Table and was so offended by its contents that he contacted the postmaster in Chicago to get the magazine banned from the mail. Under the Comstock Act, the U.S. Post Office has had stringent laws to prohibit, quote, obscene, lewd, lascivious, indecent, filthy, or vile articles from going through the mail. Derleth evidenced a desire to testify against the magazine in any hearing designed to determine its mailability. Without realizing it, this self-appointed guardian of public morality did Burroughs a huge favor. This is one of the lessons people should recognize. Anytime you try to suppress, not anytime, most of the time when you try to suppress something like this, it just pops back up. It draws more attention to it. We call it now the Streisand effect, right? Suddenly this like weird Harvard guy junkie wrote this weird book and it's so obscene that the Lovecraft's publisher is trying to shut it down. Like, what? I gotta read this thing, you know?
Yeah, right, for sure. Yeah, I can see
Yeah.
that. That does make sense. Of course, that's how it probably ascended.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is qualities of almost like Ulysses was similar, where
Yep.
this nasty book, but what it really is it? I mean, it's this experimental modernist
Yeah.
novel. Yeah.
Yeah. And it certainly there was a trial and everything and Burroughs had to get, various people to kind of come to his defense. This is where Norman Mailer in Burroughs' defense said something along the lines of Burroughs is the one American writer who maybe harboring genius or something like along those lines. So very, very interesting. Um, Now, after Naked Lunch begins to come out, Burroughs had been clean for a while, I think like 9 months or a year. He gets addicted again, mostly to a drug called Ubispasm, which is a drugstore narcotic with codeine. Again, most of the time, the stuff he's getting addicted to is pharmaceuticals that if you know who to talk to, you can just get at a drugstore.
Well,
Um,
Baptutrine.
right, right.
Side effects may include spontaneous dancing, the cut-up
Right,
method,
right. Yeah, he may
wife
invent.
murder. You may become wife murdery if you
Wow.
take too much
Yeah,
Wellbaptutrin. Well, but
yeah,
I do like the way it makes me feel for
right.
28 minutes.
Yeah, well, what percentage? How often could that
Yeah, it's
happen?
which
Right,
side effects they're
right,
on the side.
right, right.
Yeah,
That's right.
listen. It doesn't matter to me that I'm wife murdery. My wife is already dead.
Well, that is a good
I can
point.
take as much of this as I want.
Yeah,
The
he does
side
have an
effect
immunity to that side effect
wife
at this point.
murdery, it doesn't affect me. I'm a queer. I don't have a wife. I'm never gonna give me re up my dose,
Yeah, that's
doctor.
right. That's right.
Doctor feel good.
Call my Dr. Herbert Wiggers in New York. He'll tell you all about it. Yeah.
Dr. Wiggers, put the Fago down.
Now, by the mid 60s, I'm just kind of trying to skip through some stuff. By the mid 60s, Burroughs has left Tangiers. He's now in London. The main reason he's gone to London is you may remember near the beginning of the episode, I talked about Burroughs's boyfriend, this guy Ian Somerville, who is was an expert in various audio and video recording. Ian had gone to London to study, or well, gone to England to study at Cambridge, which, in my understanding, it's like an hour north of London. Burroughs goes to live in London. Um, there's a bunch of other reasons for this too. The Beat Hotel stuff had run its course. There was some legal friction because a friend of Burroughs had told Moroccan police that Burroughs was an opium smuggler, so he couldn't go back to Tangiers. And London just seemed more interesting, frankly. At this time, the Beat Hotel experiments, the magical explorations that Burroughs and Geisen were doing, didn't really end, but they did sort of change in flavor a little bit in this mid '60s, early '60s period. By 1961, Burroughs, through these magical practices, and through writing the word horde, he had basically torn apart the way I think about it. He has torn apart the fabric of his own reality, and I'm going to read a little passage here to that effect. Um, let's see here. Let's see. So, uh, uh, Allen Ginsberg had come to visit him. Allen Ginsberg and Gregory Corso had come to visit. And quote, they soon made contact with Brian Geisen, whom Bill had mentioned in his letters. They hadn't met him before. And realized that there had been some momentous changes in Bill since they last saw him, mostly caused by Brian. Brian was, as usual, very mysterious and surrounded by an atmosphere of intrigue. He told Allen that Bill had left specifically to avoid seeing Ginsberg and indicated that dark forces were at work. He described psychic attacks, scrying, invisibility, and, of course, cut-ups. He was very aloof and treated Allen with barely disguised disdain. Burroughs now suspected that the entire fabric of reality was illusory and that someone or something was running the university like a sound stage. Now, we already kind of talked about this part, but I just wanted to kind of hit it again.
Running the universe like a soundstage.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. He would later come to think that there was some kind of insect committee that was controlling everyone and everything.
Yeah, the insect committee.
Yeah, we all know about the insect
sure.
committee.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, around this time, I think 1961, he ends up meeting Tim Leary in Tangiers. Tim Leary's in Tangiers.
We got to do a
Why?
Tangiers episode. We got to do a
Maybe.
beat episode and just like
Yeah.
a Tangiers.
It's
X,
really
Y,
interesting
Z.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's all kinds of other people that I'm skipping over
Bacon.
that were there. Yeah.
Francis
Bacon was there
Mhm.
at the same time. Yeah.
Crazy.
Now Burroughs gets invited. Now Burroughs has a book out and it's getting a lot of attention. So he's rapidly like jumped up a level in his sort of like notoriety among people. Leary comes to see him and invites Burroughs to speak at a Harvard drugs conference. A little later, Tim Leary and Dick Alpert, who would become Ram Dass, they meet in London and they take mushrooms together in Bill's little squalid hotel room at the Empress Hotel. Ram Dass, Tim Leary, Bill Burroughs eating mushrooms in a weird little apartment. Not too long after, August 1961, Burroughs flies to the United States to present at the American Psychological Association's 69th annual conference to present his paper called Points of Distinction Among Psychiatric Drugs and sit on a panel with Tim Leary, Alan Watts, and others, standing room only. Now, Burroughs and Leary kind of start up a relationship at this point. Burroughs and Leary would talk on the day Tim Leary died. Tim Leary would call William Burroughs on the day he died, and he asked Bill, he just said, "Is it true?" And Bill said, "Well, I guess it's true. It's true, Tim." And then they said that they loved each other, and Leary died several hours later. I think, if I remember right, Tim Leary was calling up a bunch of people, like final conversations with various friends. Bill Burroughs happened to be one of these people. At the time, though, in the 60s, Leary and Burroughs kind of went separate ways. Leary thought that Bill was too bitter, paranoid, and out there. Tim Leary thought William S. Burroughs was too out there. And Burroughs didn't think Tim Leary was nearly as scientific as Tim Leary thought he was.
Tim Leary wasn't scientific at all.
Right, exactly.
He was scientific the way Freud was scientific.
Right.
We were just riding on money and vibes.
Yeah. Now, one thing I do want to point out is I think the impression of, I don't know if some people might have the impression that Burroughs was on psychedelics all that often. He really wasn't. He was a booze, weed, and opiates guy. Now, he did DMT, injected DMT maybe 10 times. He went on these Yage missions. He dropped acid a few times. He ate some mushrooms. You know, he didn't not do these things, but he didn't really like psychedelics, which I think most people might not. You might just think that he's like a guy who was on acid all the time or something. It's just really not the case. It wasn't his vibe. I think probably partially that thing we talked about earlier. He's a guy who killed his wife. You don't want to be in introspection land all the time if you got these various heavy guilts. You know what I mean? That could be part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, you just want a key to get out of the theme park.
Yeah.
Periodically.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Now, as we move into 1962, we got to think about William S. Burroughs is now becoming a celebrity. Not as big of a celebrity as he will become, but for instance, He's invited to speak at the Edinburgh Literary Literary Festival in 1962. Here he meets Lawrence Durrell, he meets Henry Miller. He speaks with Norman Mailer about the future of the novel. He has arrived as a writer. Basically one book, right? He has arrived. Um, there is a bit in this Edinburgh Literary Festival where Burroughs, remember, he's coming off of several years of intensive magical practice as well. He says in a panel, Burroughs claims that he once caused a plane to crash by naming the pilot and circumstances leading to the crash. Um, he'd been supposedly cutting up the text about this when the plane crashed, and the moderator said, "Are you serious?" And Burroughs said, "Of course I'm serious." So whether Burroughs was putting people on or whether he actually believed that he caused a plane to crash, I don't know. I leave that to other folks. Um, the next big literary move thing that happens for Burroughs is he begins to publish what is called the Nova Trilogy. The Nova Trilogy, well, I was going to say the Nova Trilogy is 3 books, Kevin. You might not know what a trilogy is. It's got 3 books in it. These are The Soft Machine, Nova Express, and The Ticket That Exploded. These are hardcore cut up. This is like peak cut up. They're difficult to read in a way because of this, because of how intensively they're cut up. I'm just going to read you quick summaries of these. Do I not have all 3 of them? Hold on a second. No, I do. It's just not where I thought it was. Um, okay, The Soft Machine, first book in the trilogy, compilation of descriptive and interchangeable scenes which delve into the sexual and biological issues previously explored in Naked Lunch. Supposedly, the main themes are time travel, media bombardment, and out-of-body travel. The Ticket That Exploded Burroughs deals with tape recorders, uh, cybernetic pleasure farms, homosexual erotic exploitations on the planet Venus. And the Nova Express follows Inspector Lee as he tracks down members of the Nova mob. It's probably the best book in the series because there is something more approaching a plot in that book. I am going to skip over most of this Nova trilogy stuff in favor of talking more about the Cities of the Red Knight trilogy that comes later. Yeah. One thing I do want to note, 1963, Burroughs does make an effort to reconnect with his son Billy, who'd been living in Palm Springs. 1963, Billy would be, he's still young. He's 14 or he's 15. He comes to live with Burroughs and Ian Somerville in Tangiers. He's a teenager, a young teenager, and Bill doesn't really do the kinds of things that he would need to reconnect. He's not a father anymore. He's been out of practice for years at this point. And it isn't resolved in any real way. And Billy ends up going back to Florida after, I think, 6 months. But let me we do get a little bit from Billy talking about his father's writing process, which was kind of interesting. This is while William Burroughs is writing Nova Express. Quote, Burroughs would spend hours at a time smoking keef while sitting in the orgone accumulator in the upstairs hallway, then suddenly rush out and beginning pounding the keys of his typewriter. Do we need to explain what an orgone accumulator is?
Absolutely, we need to explain what
Okay.
an orgone accumulator is.
Okay.
Do you do it? You're on
Okay.
a roll here.
Yeah. No, okay. So basically, this guy Wilhelm Reich, he believed that there is a kind of
He's like a Freudian. He's
Yeah.
one of Freud's main
acolytes, or whatever.
amigos. Yeah.
Yeah, he basically came up trying to think of how to do this in the shortest way possible. He had this notion that there was a kind of radiation out there in reality called orgone. There was also deadly orgone, but orgone, the good kind of orgone, if you could kind concentrate it and amplify it, it would have profound positive impact on your health, your mental function, your creativity, all these things. And the way that you could supposedly get it to aggregate and amplify was to build an accumulator, in which you had to layer synthetic and natural materials like wood and metal. And Burroughs had a number of these built in various places where he'd lived. So you'd have like maybe some wood and some metal and then some leather and then maybe even like plastic. But like the idea was you were supposed to layer natural and synthetic materials. And Bill would build one that he could sit in, and he would spend hours a day when he was writing, sitting in the orgone accumulator, accumulating orgone in his brain, smoking weed until inspiration struck. So yeah, that's basically it, I think.
I mean, my brain, I think of orgone as like chi. It's like his answer to that idea, right? It's like a Western pseudoscientific kind of idea. And yeah, there are people who will sit inside these like pyramid type things because they believe it helps them accumulate orgone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of it. I do think, I will tell you as a writer, if something seems to work to help you write better, then it works.
If anyone wants to donate matching orgone accumulators to the Art of Darkness boys, they have to be matching, and they have to allow Brad and I to communicate telepathically across Lake Superior.
Yeah.
So just go on to Chinese
orgoneaccumulator.com. Yeah. Alibaba, I think, sells these.
Alibaba, and just make sure they match. And I won't accept anything without asbestos.
That's the key. That's the key.
That's the real sweet.
Yeah. See, that's why this is the secret. This is why they took asbestos out of all the building. We were accumulating too much orgone. Yeah.
That's why the kids were that's why everybody got hyperactive. Everybody got crazy. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We have to get our orgone back.
Yeah. Return to asbestos.
Dude, I was actually reading about like asbestos like on Wikipedia recently. I was like, oh, that's bad. I didn't even realize.
Super bad.
Like, oh, it's so bad. Ever. Not a good way to die. No good.
We're still pulling that out of buildings. Like, it's crazy.
Dude. Yeah. That is no fun. Yeah. Well, and now everybody who listens to Art of Darkness knows what an orgone accumulator is. It was funny. I looked up orgone accumulator on the Google, and one of the people also ask is, why was Wilhelm Reich jailed?
Oh, I don't know about this story.
Listen to this. We're going to cover Wilhelm Reich at some point. The crime of which Wilhelm Reich was convicted was of having violated an injunction obtained by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, against interstate transportation of his orgone accumulator.
Oh.
A metal and wood cabinet, that Reich said restored human physical powers, and the FDA declared a medical fraud. Well, now I'm an orgone accumulator respecter.
Yeah.
Because if they're throwing this guy in jail over like putting this like crossing state lines, there's got to be something to it, dude.
It's right. I just think it's funny that they're cracking down on basically a cabinet. Like what do you like,
dude? But I mean, you don't mess with the medical association, right? Like that is like the biggest, one of the biggest. That and the teachers union are like two of the biggest cartels in the United States. You do not mess with those people.
Literally, the worst thing that could happen in an orgone accumulator is you might end up falling asleep and like missing an appointment. Like that's like the worst possible outcome of an orgone accumulator.
God, I love flimflammery. I love it. It's so good.
Yeah. I don't really. I mean, there might be something to it. I don't know. I've never tried it. I haven't really honestly looked that deep into it. I don't know.
It's literally just like a quiet room.
Yeah. Hey, listen.
Yeah.
For some writers, sitting in a quiet room and getting really stoned is a very quick route to literary productivity.
Sure. Suddenly I can get hard again.
Yeah.
Surprise. I've reduced my stress. My blood pressure's come down.
Yeah. I got to chill out for 45 minutes. I got to chill out.
Now I have an erection.
Right.
This is so interesting. And then you open the door and Dr. Wigger is there with the bill. I this is okay. We got to get back to this. Is You're doing a great job. I'm loving this. Is so much fun.
Thanks, man.
We'll get
Yeah.
back to Bros, but this is an idea for a show for anybody who's looking for an idea for a show. I landed on the, wikipedia.org/wiki/orgone, and I'm looking at the funny orgone accumulator. It's literally just a box. It's like
Mhm.
it's like the room that they put the Amazon employees in when they've,
Right.
when they've dumped
Right.
into their diapers or whatever.
Right.
And this article is part of a series on alternative medicine. I would listen to a podcast that was just going A to Z
Oh yeah.
through the alternative medicine. It
Yeah.
literally, dude, acupressure, acupuncture, alkaline diet, anthroposophic medicine, apitherapy, applied. These are just the A's, dude.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way through like
Oh, and there's
young
a
blood.
crazy story. Like half of those, there's some total crazy dude behind it. Half of, some
Yep.
percentage of them kind of work, right?
Right.
Like,
I mean, I would
interesting.
listen to a podcast. This is a free idea for anybody who is struggling with a podcast. Like, I would listen to a podcast where you and your buddy, talk about vaginal steaming and explain it and explain the history of it, because that's one
Yeah.
of them,
Yeah.
and then bring on an expert.
That'd be
I would
great.
100% listen to that podcast.
That'd be
Young
fantastic.
blood transfusion, incredible. And then
Yeah.
right after, conspiracy theories.
Well, yeah.
I mean, in any case, yeah.
Yeah, no, that
super
would be a
fun.
great, that would be great.
That
like-
actually would be a show that
Yeah.
I would listen to.
I would
be
listen to that.
Really fascinating
Yeah.
and super fun. But that's
Well, because you can
that's
tie
for
it into
another
so
day.
many things,
Oh,
right? When
yeah,
it came and who
totally.
invented it and what was the resistance.
And if you actually did your research and like got the books and kind of made the case for
Yeah.
it'd be very interesting.
Very super
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, so skipping ahead a little bit, 1965, September 1965, Burroughs lands back in London once again, and it is now swinging London. It's the swinging 60s. People who probably know what this is, the swinging 60s, let me just read real quick from the Wikipedia. We'll pretend like the 60s are a foreign country. The swinging 60s was a youth-driven cultural revolution that took place in the United Kingdom during the mid to late 1960s, emphasizing modernity and fun-loving hedonism, while swinging London denoted as its center. It saw flourishing in art, music, and fashion, and was symbolized by the city's, quote, pop and fashion experts such as the Beatles, other British invasion musical acts, the mod and psychedelic subcultures, Mary Quant's miniskirt designs, popular fashion models such as Twiggy, the iconic status of popular shopping areas such as Kings Road, Kensington, and Carnaby Street, the political activism of the anti-nuclear movement, and the sexual liberation movement. Burroughs drops right into the middle of this. I'm going to kind of gloss over this a little bit, but there is one fascinating anecdote about this period. Okay. Now, there gets to be, Burroughs is very interested in doing cut-ups. Now, he's not just writing. He's also doing photo collage kind of cut-ups. He's doing, he's trying to figure out all the different ways that you can use this. I said at one point, he was even sort of cutting up his personal relationships in a way. Like he thought that this scrambling of things was really a way to like shunt yourself out of whatever trap you had found yourself in, right? Now, at this time in the mid 60s, Paul McCartney had gotten interested in releasing, which was a great idea, and I don't know if they actually ever did it. Paul McCartney got interested in recording monthly records that would almost be like a magazine on a record. It would have little bits of interviews and backstage talk and in-studio conversation with musicians, might have little radio plays, and poets could come on and read it. It's kind of a cool idea, right? If you subscribe to it every month, you would get a record, and it would be just kind of a hodgepodge of different swinging London stuff going on.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, come on. How great was that? I remember when that movie came out, we couldn't
it was
believe it. It was
fantastic.
so funny.
Yeah.
We cried.
Yeah.
My mother
Yeah.
died laughing.
Yeah.
We probably went to see it in the cinema like two, 3 times. It never happened. My
So
mom
good.
thought it was the funniest damn thing. And he was
It was
really funny.
really
That
funny.
dude was one of the biggest stars in the world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
rightly
Yeah.
so. Very, very, very funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's kind of gone away, hasn't he? You don't hear
A
much
little
from him.
bit. Yeah. It's like
Yeah,
every couple of years he
in a
makes
way, it's
movie.
kind of like, okay, good. That's good. I don't need to. I don't need to know what your politics are. I don't need.
Right.
You
Right.
were one of the
Right.
funniest dudes for like a decade.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's
dude.
you know, that's all you need, right? You don't have to
Yeah,
go on forever.
for real. Yeah, respect the
Yeah.
hell out of that. Yeah,
Yeah. So anyway, so Paul
the
McCartney
teeth,
wants,
the
yeah,
bad
they
teeth.
were so good. The
Perfect.
look was perfect.
Perfect.
That look was
Perfect.
totally perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so
Only a
Paul,
Canadian could have made that. Only a Canadian. An
yeah, so,
American couldn't have made that.
well, yeah, I
Somebody
think
from
that's probably true.
from Britain couldn't have made it. A Canadian had to make
Yeah,
that.
interesting.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna introduce my kid to that one day.
Oh my God,
Um,
I gotta show my daughter Wayne's World if she hasn't seen it. We gotta
oh,
make that
yeah,
happen. Yeah,
yeah,
dude.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, Paul McCartney wants to make these little records, right? And to do this, they want a different studio space, and Ringo happens to have some room in his apartment. So they set up this little recording studio. And the trick is, I mean, partially to make these, you need people to be able to come by. But the Beatles are so big that they can't let anybody know about it. So they're kind of in this conundrum where basically what they've done is they've built a recording studio that nobody can really use. So what ends up happening is Paul McCartney's in there kind of screwing around, doing like tape recorder cut up kind of stuff. And Barry Miles, the author of this book, is friends with Paul McCartney and he's friends with Burroughs. And Barry Miles says to Burroughs, like, hey, you know, we got this little recording space in Ringo's apartment. If you want to go use it, you might as well. Somebody might as well use this thing. And there was a time where Paul McCartney and William S. Burroughs were just hanging out in a bedroom studio in Ringo's apartment.
What year?
1965, 1966.
You're kidding me.
No.
Well, when did the White Album come out? Because the White Album very famously has no, it was released in '68. And
Yeah.
so I wonder if he had a direct influence on
I think I think
number nine or whatever it is.
I think he did. So check this. So quote, Paul told Q magazine in 1986, quote, I used to sit in the basement in Montague Square. I used to sit in a basement in Montague Square with William Burroughs and a couple of guys he knew from Morocco doing little tapes, crazy stuff with guitars and cello. Paul and Bill got on well. Bill explained all about cut-ups, and there was a lot of talk about pot, with Ian Somerville at one point accusing Paul of being, quote, just an old pothead. Rich talk from someone who used to stuff his pillow with marijuana leaves when he was in Morocco. Paul speaking, quote, in our conversations, I thought about getting into cut-ups and things like that, and I thought I would use the studio for cut-ups. This is Paul talking. But it ended up being more of a practical use to me, really. I thought, let Burroughs do the cut-ups. I'll just go in and demo things. I'd just written Eleanor Rigby, and so I went down there in the basement on my days off on my own, just took a guitar down and used it as a demo studio. Burroughs, quote, the three of us talked about the possibilities of the tape recorder. He'd just come in and work on his Eleanor Rigby. Ian recorded his rehearsals, so I saw the song taking shape. Once again, not knowing much about music, I could see he knew what he was doing. He was very pleasant and prepossessing. Nice-looking young fellow, nice-looking young man, fairly hardworking. Paul said, quote, William did some little cut-ups and we did some crazy tape recordings in the basement. We used to sit around talking about all these amazing inventions that people were doing, areas that were getting into like the dream machine that Ian and Brian Geisen had made. It was all very new and very exciting. And so a lot of social time was taken up with just sitting around and chatting. So Paul and Bill just hanging out.
Yeah, the song is Revolution 9.
Yeah.
And
That could
this
be,
is
I thought that was more of a Lennon thing, but maybe I'm
well,
wrong.
it was, but I mean, you'd assume. I mean, here's
They're
what
all,
Lennon said of it, right? Revolution 9, and we're getting ready. This is a teaser for the coming John
Mhm.
Lennon episode,
Mhm.
which I am beginning to prepare. Revolution 9 was an unconscious picture of what I actually think will happen when it happens, just like a drawing of a revolution. All the thing was made with loops. I had about 30 loops going, fed them into one basic track. I was getting classical tapes, going upstairs and chopping them up, making it backwards and things like that to get the sound effects. One thing was an engineer's testing voice saying, this is EMI test series number 9, number 9, number 9. I just cut up whatever he said and I'd number 9 it. There you go.
Right.
9 turned out to be my birthday and my lucky number and everything. All right.
Right. There
Um,
was some influence, perhaps not 100% conscious, but
but the word there, though, is cut up. I just cut
it's
it
cut
up.
up.
I
It's in
mean,
the air.
so
It's
yeah,
all in
there
the
you go.
air, right?
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. Um, yeah, so I just thought that was kind of a cool. And of
That's
course,
fascinating.
Burroughs is on the Sergeant Pepper's cover. He's one of the guys on that cover. So
Hmm. Hmm.
um
We
now
should
what else?
probably make a point of trying to do everybody on the cover except for the Austrian corporal, because as we know that will end the show when
Yeah,
we do
yeah,
that.
yeah,
So we
yeah,
have to, in any
yeah.
case, maybe
Yeah,
maybe
I've been
one day.
tweeting about some of those people over the last couple of weeks. Yeah,
Iconic.
yeah, it really is. Yeah, it really is. Okay, so some other things that are going on in this period. This is where Bill gets really into Scientology, even more so, and that we're going to talk about more in depth on the After Dark, patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. Um, in 1968, he attends the famous Democratic National Convention in Chicago, for Esquire magazine. He attends with Jean Genet, who is one of his favorite living writers, and the writer Terry Southern. Uh, very little materialized for Esquire, but he went. He was there. Like everybody alive seems to have been at the Chicago Democratic National Convention, 1968 Chicago. Um, when he was there, Burroughs made a pit stop in New York. This is 1968. It's the last time that he'll see Kerouac. This is right before Kerouac famously goes and has his drunken meltdown on Buckley's firing line. And at this point, Burroughs hadn't really spent that much time in the United States in a long time, and he saw that in New York, uh, 42nd Street had degraded into full-on sex shops, peep shows, full-on vice. Apparently, nobody was controlling anything, and Burroughs said, "Let's pack up and move to New York.
That was
We're going on the
right,
road."
right where my office was when I first moved to New York City.
Is
When
that
I,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that was one of the first places I worked. I think it was like 40th, right
Okay.
in Hell's
Yeah.
Kitchen,
All
baby,
right. Yeah.
right off the Port Authority.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful,
Yeah.
real cultural.
Right. Right. Right.
I remember the time the homeless guy rented an office from the guy I was working for and moved in. We
Ah,
found out
nice.
over the holidays that he was living there.
Oh boy, just living
It
there.
was
Just
real. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. He was there
Yeah.
all night, every night. We thought he was
Okay.
working real hard, that guy.
Right, right, right,
He
right.
moved
Yeah.
in.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
Yep.
Now, so Burroughs, most of the 70s, Burroughs is in New York. Not entirely. There's a lot of moving around. He's bouncing between Tangiers and London and New York. But for our purposes, we'll think of him, Bill Burroughs, as being in the 70s, he's in New York. His mother dies, I think 1971. She'd been in a home suffering from dementia. He felt tremendous guilt because he literally never went to visit her, even though they were quote unquote close. She left him his final $10,000. That was the last of the Burroughs fortune. But it didn't really matter because Burroughs could now make his own money. Um, there was talk about making a naked lunch film in the early 70s. Brian Geisen wrote the script and was apparently terrible, and it was like a musical. Chuck Barris got involved. Mick Jagger was involved at one point. Um, Weirdly enough, for several years, Burroughs and Mick Jagger were in each other's orbit.
Hmm.
Even though Burroughs really didn't like rock and roll, which is kind of funny for his later huge influence, like making like records with Kurt Cobain and other people. Burroughs like rock and roll was just not for him. He was born in 1914. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It would be like, it'd be like my like what is like what's oh, I can't think of the the um the dance music guy that has like long hair on one half. Who's that guy?
Oh, I have no idea
Skrillex?
who. Sure,
Yeah.
Skrillex.
Yeah. Burroughs being into the Rolling Stones would be like my dad being into Skrillex. It just doesn't
Okay.
like it
Yeah, it doesn't really compute.
doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Sure.
Um
Mick Jagger was supposed to be in, and he was on the set of Fitzcarraldo.
oh,
But
was he?
yeah, he was. Herzog had to rewrite the script to get the character out that he was supposed to play because he had to
Interesting.
go on tour
Right.
with the Stones, and the
Yeah.
schedule didn't work. I mean, that shoot was nuts. I mean,
Right.
my
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
favorite little factoid about that is at the end of that shoot, the chief of the tribe that they'd been working with there offered to kill Kinski for Herzog because he was so nuts. Kinski was so
Herzog was
nuts, and
like,
Herzog was like,
maybe.
I'm trying to think about it. Yeah,
Let me sleep
future
on it.
subject,
Yeah.
Kinski, dude.
Yeah, I've been wanting to do
Real,
Kinski,
real
Kinski for a
monster.
while.
Real
Yeah.
monster.
Yeah, for sure. 1974, young man named James Grauerholtz, he's 21 years old. He writes Burroughs. He'd written Ginsberg too. He's a guy from Kansas. He played in a bunch of bands around Kansas. He's a gay guy, and he loved Burroughs' work and loved Ginsberg's work. And he comes to New York, and he ends up meeting Ginsberg, and Ginsberg kind of points him in the direction of Burroughs. Burroughs is having kind of a turbulent time, having a difficulty settling into New York, missing Ian. Ian is back in Europe, and Burroughs is in New York and trying to figure out what he's going to do. And he's an older man. He's 60 now, right? So it's the whole thing's starting to slow down a little bit in some ways and speed up in other ways. It's kind of an interesting time, the 70s for him. This Grauerhaus guy shows up. Burroughs sort of invites him in, and for a while they are lovers. Eventually, over time, this migrates into more of the relationships has a major professional component. Grauerhaus becomes like his business manager, and he heads up a company called Burroughs Communications, which is like the business arm of Burroughs Enterprise. The reason that Burroughs was such a figure in the 80s is because of Grauerhaus. He was constantly getting him plugged into things, organizing events, making sure that Patti Smith met him and making sure that Cobain met him later, right? Keeping Burroughs at the forefront of pop cultural, like I don't know, pop culture, alternative cultural milieu that Burroughs was in there. A lot of this is because of Grauerhaus really understood. He was young, right? He was from that generation. He understood this stuff. And Grauerhaus would be with him until the end, not romantically. It starts off as sort of a sexual thing, 21-year-old Grauerhaus, 60-year-old Burroughs. And over time, it's more sort of father-son business partner. And Grauerhaus decided, like, I want to get it to the point where all Burroughs has to worry about is writing. That's what I wanted. I wanted him to get to that point. And so he made it happen. Now,
who doesn't want somebody like that in their lives?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Now,
all Kevin does is Art of Darkness,
Yeah.
the podcast about vaginal steaming, and writes his plays. That's it.
Right.
Incredible.
What a life.
Thank you, honey. Thank you, honey.
Yeah. Now,
I'm podcasting right from the orgone accumulator. Can you imagine, dude?
yeah.
If we started podcasting from we'd be on Rogan in 2 months.
Oh yeah. We should.
Yeah.
Could you imagine the warmth of the tones you would get? Just the
chocolately tones.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Don't edit. Just upload.
Send it. Just live streaming from the orgone accumulator.
That's what we should do. Our live episode in 2025. Live from the orgone accumulator. Yeah,
we're both in separate orgone accumulators.
Tuning in.
Oh, fun.
Now he becomes in the 70s, Burroughs does become a sort of a senior figure for the remnants of the 60s cultural movements, right? And it's interesting time because Ginsberg had been plugged in with the hippies, but Burroughs was not a pacifist, right? And so he appealed to a certain sort of disaffected hippie type. There's a little bit of anger, there's a little bit of bile, there's satire and darkness in there, right? And so Burroughs eventually acquires part of a building that was a former YMCA gym at 222 Bowery called The Bunker. They painted parts of it white, they painted parts of it battleship gray, and it would become a matriculation point in the late 70s for all kinds of New York hipsters, famous and not, some of them not so famous. Now, people like Patti Smith came through there. People like Susan Sontag and Dennis Hopper. Lou Reed was in there for photo ops. He'd have dinner. Burroughs would have dinners there that were literally like photo opportunities for him in the sort of the hip New York art community. As part of the scene, Burroughs at one point interviews Jimmy Page, and they have this long conversation about magic, which is pretty cool. Now, something else starts to happen. Let me think about how to do this. There's another thing going on. There's a concurrent thing with all this New York aspect going on, and that is that Billy Burroughs Jr. in the early 70s starts dying. He has you have to remember his mother was, when she was pregnant with him, was an alcoholic speed addict. He very rapidly got into drugs and alcohol as a young guy. He wrote a couple books himself that people kind of helped put together. A book called Speed about being a speed addict, and a book called oh, what is it called? Kentucky. What the heck is the title of that book? Kentucky Ham. Uh, a third novel, Precredi Junction, was never quite completed, but I think you can read parts of it if you're interested in that. Um, so 1947, Billy Burroughs Jr. was born, right? Uh, he weirdly enough, when Billy was 15, he accidentally shot his best friend in the neck with a rifle, right? His dad had shot his mom, right? There's just these weird things. After shooting his friend with a rifle, he had a nervous breakdown. This led to all kinds of things. Eventually, he has, I think in 1974, he has to have a liver transplant. Now, nowadays, even nowadays, a liver transplant is dicey. In 1974, there had been a very small number of them even performed. And I think, if I remember right, Billy Burroughs had his liver transplant performed by the first doctor who ever did a liver transplant. So very early days of this kind of thing. And Billy's life just dwindled from 1974 on. At one point, William Burroughs was teaching at the Naropa Institute in Boulder, and Billy came to like be with him for a while and got so sick that Billy had to stay. He couldn't be moved. He was so ill. And William Burroughs stayed in Boulder for 5 or 6 months, visiting him every day. But it was one of these things that Billy was not just sick and a drug addict, he was also angry and depressed and suicidal. And it's the whole thing is just sad. Like he could never live up to his father. His father had ignored him for years and years and years. And now that he was paying attention to him, his father didn't know how to relate to him, really. Um, Billy had like tried to do all the cool drug taking stuff that his dad did, and his liver just failed when he's like a young man. And it's like, oh, I thought you could just be cool and do drugs your whole life. Turns out you can't. Like what? Like what? He's like literally trying to live up to his father at some certain points. Um, and anyway, 1981, um, Billy dies. Now, 1981 is also the tail end of something I'm going to talk about briefly. This is from Word Virus. If you just want like one single book, Burroughs book, this is the book to get. It's just selections from all of his biggest stuff. There's bits from Junkie and bits from Naked Lunch, etc. But I actually want to read is from an intro uh, to the Cities of the Red Knight trilogy written by James Grauerhaus. Quote, by all accounts, a tsunami of smack hit New York in the winter of 78, 79, and within a few months, not only Burroughs, but most of his closest friends as well were addicted to heroin. Now, he is 78, he is 64 years old, and he's back on heroin. He was preoccupied with a circle of much younger fellow users who could score for him on the Lower East Side's burgeoning heroin scene. After 5 years, Burroughs was still working in fits and starts on Cities of the Red Knight, but his heroin habit took up a great deal of his time and his money. For the first time in many years, he was well and truly hooked. Ironically, some of the glassine bags of junk that he received were stamped with the Dr. Nova brand, inspired by his own literary persona. So he's literally would sometimes get a bag of heroin and it says Dr. Nova on it. And that's clearly a nod to himself, which is just got to be a surreal experience. Now, 1981, a handful of things happen. Billy Jr. dies. William Burroughs is devastated. The the continued heroin use is eating up all of Burroughs's time and money. And Cities of the Red Knight is finally done and ready to publish. At the same time, Bill does one other thing. It's time to get the hell out of New York City. And where does he go? He's a man who's lived in Paris. He's lived in Tangiers. He's lived in London. He's lived in New York. He's going to Lawrence, Kansas, where he would spend the rest of his life from 1981 till 1997.
Huh. Well, that's a turn.
Yeah. Now, Lawrence, Kansas, arguably for a globetrotting man such as himself, it's a lot closer to St. Louis than any place he's lived up to that point. It's not St. Louis, but it's way, way, way closer, and it's a more comparable cultural milieu. The big reason that he moves there is because that's where James Grauhaus is from and where he wants to be. Lawrence, for people who don't know, it's a big college. It's a good-sized college town. Um, Now, he, yeah, so he lives there for the next 16 years, living in and around Lawrence, Kansas. He spends a great deal of time with James Grauerhaus. He would, over time, have a couple more younger boyfriends. He gets visited by people like Ginsberg, various beat figures, and literary people. This guy Dean Ripa becomes a good friend of his. This is a guy who's a writer and a snake collector. People like Michael Stipe of REM come to visit him. Kurt Cobain comes to visit him. They didn't sit in studio together, I don't think, but there's a recording called The Priest They Called Them, which is a collaboration between Burroughs and Kurt Cobain. It's basically Burroughs reading Burroughs routines based on Silent Night and the Star Spangled Banner, and Cobain playing like discordant guitar. It's kind of cool. I think it's worth checking out as a cultural touchstone. Is it a hit? Not really, but for the Burroughs or Cobain completist, it is interesting. There's a lot of records that come out in this 80s time because Grauerhaus is trying to make Burroughs profitable. So there's a lot of recordings and there's Burroughs doing a lot of readings. When Cities of the Red Night comes out, he does a big reading tour and, charging ticket prices, right? And here's one thing to say about Burroughs. 1981 is that time he's on Saturday Night Live. Probably Grauerhaus pulled that together. He is a interesting reading. I don't think that he's for everybody necessarily because his voice is so weird, but if you see him on stage or you listen to him reading, it is distinct and it plucks a chord that not many other people can pluck. He feels like a member of this insect committee out there that he's talking about. And it's kind of unsettling. I find it a little scary. I enjoy listening to him talking, but I find it a little scary almost, like menacing at least.
Yeah, if you throw on some of his music, in 30 minutes, you'll be transported. There's nothing else like it. It's really weird. It's far out. Far out.
For sure. For sure. Now, one of his big ideas that we haven't talked about, and we're getting close to the end. I want to spend a little bit on Cities of the Red Night trilogy, and then we'll kind of tell the last moment, and that'll be it. One thing I want to talk about that I haven't is this notion. It's probably his most famous idea, is that language is a virus, right? This book I was looking at. This collection of his work is called Word Virus. Like, what is it? What does he mean? What does this have to do with anything? What is this, right? Let me read this a little bit. Quote, "My basic theory is that the written word was actually a virus that made the spoken word possible. The word has not been recognized as a virus because it has achieved a state of stable symbiosis with the host, though this symbiotic relationship is now breaking down. Is the virus then simply a time bomb left on this planet to be activated by remote control? An extermination program, in fact? In its path from full virulence to its ultimate goal of symbiosis, will any human creature survive? Taking the virus eye view, the ideal situation would appear to be one in which the virus replicates in cells without in any way disturbing their normal metabolism. This has been suggested as the ideal biological situation toward which all viruses are slowly evolving." Kevin, what do you think? When you hear language as a virus, the word is a virus. What does that mean to you? Does it sound just like some cockamamie
Well,
stuff, or does
no,
it
no, I think
actually?
it's true. I mean, I think it's this idea. It's almost this animistic idea, but not about the physical world. It's about the world of dreams and ideology and the mimetic world. The idea, again, I'm thinking a lot about Herzog. When I'm finished writing this, I'll probably bring him up less frequently on the pod. But there's in one of these documentaries about him, and it's like an interview with him, in German, and he's talking about how he really believes that the images that he presents are they're not his own. He presents images that people recognize and claim as their own because he's somehow drawing upon almost, I guess, like an akashic record of images that exist kind of in the ether, and he just brings them to fruition. They're not his own ideas. He's more of a midwife of ideas. And I think you could make the case that, yeah, language might have its own will. It exists
Mhm.
outside. There's not one single person. Nobody decided that based would come to mean what it means, right?
Right,
Based, whatever.
right,
Nobody said when cool became
right,
and it goes viral. And
right.
I don't think you can I don't think you can argue. It would be more difficult to argue against this idea
Yeah.
that language is like a virus.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
even like when you go talk to like the famous Richard Dawkins idea of the meme, right? If you go back to that version of it, language, the whole idea of the meme, we know memes as being like jokes, and those memes do fit Richard Dawkins, what he was talking about with the meme. But for him, a meme was like the basic subunit of a cultural idea, and
Right.
that they could replicate and pass on just like genes could. And some would be better fit and they would evolve and everything, just like genes do, right? And language, that is what language is. That's how language survives, is by if I express something to you, I use a word in a way that to you makes sense, then you will start using that word in that way from now on, right? And so there is it operates like a virus, at least metaphorically. Burroughs, I think, is then taking it to the next level, is like, well, that's because it is a virus. Right. Yeah. And I think that's fascinating. I think it is I think it is a useful way of looking at it. And it's certainly like a lot of things that I think Burroughs says, whether or not it's 100% true in I've been thinking a ton about this. There's this clip that was going around Twitter the other day about Yuval Noah Harari talking about how um, everything is just stories. It's just a story. Religion is just a story. This and that, they're just stories. And I just got thinking, it's just like, dude, do you not understand what a story is? Like literally, this is how we understand. This is how we make life habitable, is by telling stories about it. That's the only way we even get through this thing.
It is literally what we are.
Yeah,
If we were not stories, we would not name our children. We would
right.
not follow names. No, the man is an ultimate midwit. He should be
Yeah,
shunned from public life, and anything he's ever touched should be razed
yeah,
to the ground. It's
right.
ridiculous. And he talks about a mountain is a mountain. And I'm like, no, a mountain is also a story, you
Yeah,
moron.
right,
Right? Because I mean, it's like, we're just forgetting Wittgenstein happened? We're just
right.
forgetting all of this happened.
Hmm.
No, it's
Hmm.
it's peak midwittery. It's actually not even midwittery. He's just a villainous piece of scum who deserves to be
Well,
again
well,
driven from public life.
well, and what I hate about it is he's literally attacking. He is going at the root of meaning. Like the next step from, oh, that's just a story, is nothing means anything. That's like the next logical conclusion,
Well, yeah,
right?
of
And
course. I
then,
mean, but
yeah,
they just want totalitarian
right,
power, and
right,
I guess like Davos this year is like rebuilding trust, and it's like
right.
that's a funny title because it's like, why would you need to do that?
Yeah,
What
yeah. Well,
possibly happened? When we're getting into
right,
the podcast down by the
right,
docks, I've got
right.
the insects. The insect people are on the other line,
They're on the
Brad.
other line. They're saying,
They're
stop, stop it.
chittering away, chittering away. They have Dr. Wigger hostage. And
No, no, not
really,
Dr.
oh no,
Wigger.
oh my God. When is the gathering of the Juggalos? We've got to get ready. He can't miss that. If he misses that, it's terrible.
So let's talk about for a bit um, about what I think. This is my personal opinion, and a lot of this has been, I suppose. I think that these three books that Burroughs put out in the 1980s, The Cities of the Red Knight, and the trilogy is called The Cities of the Red Knight, The Place of Dead Roads, and The Western Lands, I think these are a goddamn masterpiece. Now, I'm going to try to make that case in a fairly brief amount of time and give you a sense of what these things are. Now, I'm going to read, this is going to sound wonky, but I once wrote a paper on these three books. I'm going to read you just a little bit of it because I think it's a good intro. I spent a lot of time in the past trying to write this as a good intro, so I'm going to use it. This is yeah. Okay. Quote. The books are not novels. There's no one aspect, no scene or character that will tell you what they are. One thing does not lead to the next. There's no chart that can smoothly document what happens. But here are some pins to stick in that shape-shifting map. A universe of paradoxical science, observer-created religions, intractable time, spiritual mutiny, a set of prehistorical desert towns, the cities, serving as a gateway to the Western lands, an ambiguous, paradisical Egyptian-style afterlife promised only for the courageous and the lucky. The Red Knight itself is a radioactive virus sent back in time to either provoke chaos, wipe out the population, or begin the next stage of evolution, probably all three. Language is a different virus that emerged in the distant past, which infects humanity up the throat and dissembles reality with all its symbols. Identity is fluid and transient, such that the hero of this second book, a guy named Kim Carson's, a revolutionary gunslinger of the late 1900s who plans on colonizing space, is also the hero of the first book, a guy named Clem Snide, a private investigator specializing in sex magic in essentially modern times. And he's also a gunsmith under a utopian pirate of the 1800s. He's also the creation of a writer named William Hall, who wrote at least some of the book he features in. He's also Audrey Carson, who sometimes just shows up or seems to be experiencing all of this as some kind of experiment. You only know they're the same person because Burroughs tells you. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Okay. Now, a little bit, I'm going to skip a little bit more of this. If somebody wants to read this, we might have in the show notes. It's definitely on Twitter. I kind of broke some of this book down to the extent that it can be broken down. I'm going to read you a couple summaries or overviews from other people here to try and triangulate what the hell this trilogy is. Okay, this is from, there's a pretty good article on literary, a website called Literariness, an article from this guy, a person named Nasrullah Mambrol, literariness.org. And this writer just goes through every Burroughs book and just tells you what it is. And they're pretty good. They're actually the best I've seen. Most of the time, if you buy a Burroughs book and you read the back cover, that has little to nothing to do with what's actually in the book. So from Literariness, talking about the first volume, Cities of the Red Knight, quote, the novel begins with three distinct plots, which seem at first to be only tenuously related. One plot concerns a retroactive utopia founded by 18th century pirates, which Burroughs uses as a foundation for social criticism. A second plot, from which the title comes, depicts the mythical, quote, cities of the Red Knight, which existed in prehistoric time and function as a dystopia through which the reader views present culture. A third plot involves a present-day investigator who traces the mystery of a deadly virus known as B23 to its historical origins in the cities of the Red Knight. Each plot employs conventions from one popular genre or another. The story of the utopian pirates colony reads very much like a boy's adventure story. The story of the advanced prehistoric city takes its structure from science fiction, and the story of the investigation of the virus lends itself to the conventions of the hard-boiled detective story. That's a pretty darn good summary. Now, from the back of the book, Cities of the Red Knight, you get this. While young men wage war against an evil empire of zealous mutants, the population of this modern inferno is afflicted with the epidemic of a radioactive virus, an opium-infused apocalyptic vision. Okay. Now, I'm going to read you a little bit from Cities of the Red Knight. And if I succeed, if one person out there goes through and reads all of these who hasn't read it, I will consider this episode a success. Um, okay, so one thing that happens in Cities of the Red Knight is there's this great character named Clem Snide. Clem Snide is a private investigator. He often uses sex magic to solve crimes. He's trying to solve a murder that has something to do with the virus that the radioactive space virus that affected Cities of the Red Knight. I know how ridiculous this all sounds. Now, one thing that Clem Snide kind of realizes he needs to do is he needs to kind of solve this case or prevent the virus from happening. He needs to forge his own pre-recorded originals of events. Now I'm going to read something about this. Now he's talking to the Iguana Sisters. And he's reading a book called Clem Snide's reading a book called Cities of the Red Knight, and he's talking to the Iguana Sisters, who seem to be these ageless, weird mutants who are involved in every stage of history. And he gets a copy of the book from them. Let's see. These are copies, the Iguana Sister says. Please study them carefully. I will pay $1 million for recovery of the originals. How good are the copies? Clem Snide asked. Almost perfect. Then why do you want the originals? Collector's vanity? Changes, Mr. Snide, can only be affected by alterations in the original. The only thing not pre-recorded in a pre-recorded universe are the pre-recordings themselves. The copies can only repeat themselves word for word. A virus is a copy. You can pretty it up, cut it up, scramble it. It will reassemble in the same form. Without being an idealist, I am reluctant to see the originals in the hands of the Countess de Gulpa. She's the villain of the story. Reading a little bit further down. She laid out a check for 200,000 cools on the table. I began examining the books, skipping through to get a general impression. They are composed in a variety of styles and periods. Some of them seem to stem from the 1920s of The Great Gatsby, Old Sport, and others to derive from the Edwardian era of Saki, reflecting an unbearably flawed boyishness. There is an underlying current of profound frivolity, with languid young aristocrats drawling epigrams in streets of disease, war, and death. There's a Rover Boys / Tom Swift storyline where boy heroes battle against desperate odds. The books are color comics. Jokes, Jim calls them. Some lost color process has been used to transfer three-dimensional holograms under the curious, tough, translucent, parchment-like material of the pages. You ache to look at these colors. What facts could have given rise to such legends? So that's not to give you really any concrete information, but to sort of point out the fact that within the Cities of the Red Knight, there is a book called The Cities of the Red Knight, which is purportedly by William S. Burroughs, which is also some kind of hyperdimensional time warping object. Okay. So, Place of Dead Roads. Again, I'm going to read from this great literariness article. In the second book of the trilogy, The Place of Dead Roads, Burroughs continues the process of myth-making. His protagonist is Kim Carsons, a late 19th century gunslinger who utilizes a sort of hole in time, a phenomenon introduced in the Cities of the Red Knight. Through this hole, Carsons becomes a time traveler moving precariously across time and space, encountering different cultures and time periods in an effort to forge some sense of the whole, some sense of control over his own destiny. He seeks fulfillment in desperate, almost lonely homosexual encounters, in drugs, and in the sense of power he feels by manipulating others. This book is as autobiographical. It's one layer removed from like autobiography, right? Kim Carson's 18th century gunslinger trying to shoot a hole in time is Burroughs trying to write his books, right? But it's framed as this like Wild West story that also includes time traveling and sex magic.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds like a fun read, dude.
It's
maybe
a
one
trip,
year,
man.
maybe one year we throw it into the book club just so I can get a chance to read it,
Yeah,
dude. Yeah, maybe
yeah.
next year.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, I don't even know. I don't even know if we've picked our December pick. So maybe, I don't know.
think
Maybe we throw a
have.
curveball.
Yeah, it would
Yeah,
be a
and
curveball. Yeah,
if you're on Patreon, you're a member of the book club, whether you want to be or not. And you don't have to you don't have to attend. Those happen on
Mm.
Zoom. If you can't make it or don't want to make it, you can just listen back. We record it. It's extra content
Oh yeah.
for Patreon, and we've got some good selections. What's the first book for the book club, Brad? This year we're
Wise
doing
Blood by Flannery
Wise Blood.
O'Connor.
I've got
Yeah.
my copy. I
Yeah.
ordered all of my books for the year en
Nice.
masse. So my
Nice.
house is just like the
Yeah.
the
They're showing up
yes,
every
and
day.
yeah, it's just like more books, more books, more
Good.
books, more
Good,
books. It's
man.
starting to look like the beginning of Ghostbusters.
Excellent. Excellent. No human stacks books
No
that way.
human being would, yeah, no human would stack books like this or whatever that line is. I love that. Oh, it's so
Yeah.
good. And there's a new Ghostbusters coming out, man. I'm
Oh, that's
excited.
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that is
Frozen
exciting.
Frozen Empire. I'll be there.
Very cool. That's a
I'm
good
a
title.
ghost. That's my fandom, dude. I
Yeah.
love
That's
Ghostbusters. I'm
cool.
not a super Ghostbusters nerd, but
Yeah.
I love that movie.
That's a
Yeah.
good, yeah. Yeah. It's hard not to like it. Yeah.
Speaking of ectoplasm,
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's very Burroughs. And that series may be more Burroughs inspired than we first think. I'm going to read quickly what Burroughs said Place of Dead Roads is about. Okay. This is, I don't like to do favorites, but if you put a gun to my head and said we're doing the William Tell routine, unless you tell me your favorite William S. Burroughs book, it would be Place of Dead Roads. I think you can read it without reading Cities of the Red Knight, but reading both of them is probably the best. This is Burroughs talking about the Place of Dead Roads. Quote, "The Place of Dead Roads is a sequel to the Cities of the Red Knight. What happened there was like commandos were parachuted behind enemy lines in time, and they sort of cleaned up and drastically altered South and Central America. Dead Roads is the same thing applied to North America. They did South and Central America in the Catholic Church. Now they're doing North America in the Protestant ethic and the Bible Belt. There's drastically fewer sexual scenes in Dead Roads than Cities of the Red Knight. There's really not that many at all. It's really concerned with weaponry more than anything else. Weaponry on all levels. The whole history of weaponry and war. The history of this planet is the history of war. The only thing that gets a Homo sapien up off his dead ass is a foot up, and that foot is war." Now let me read a passage from Place of Dead Roads. Quickly-ish. William Seward Hall. Quote, "William Seward Hall. He was a corridor, a hall leading to many doors. He remembered the long fugitive years after the fall of Wagdas. Wagdas is one of the cities. The knowledge inside him like a sickness. The migrations, the danger, the constant alertness, the furtive encounters with others who had some piece of the knowledge, the vast picture puzzle slowly falling into place. Time to be up and gone. You're not paid off to be quiet about what you know. You are paid not to find it out. And in his case, it was too late. If he lived long enough, he couldn't help finding it out because that was the purpose of his life. A guardian of the knowledge and those who could use it. And a guardian must be ruthless in defense of what he guards. And he developed new ways of imparting the knowledge to others. The old method of handing it down by word of mouth from master to initiate is now much too slow and too precarious. Death reduces the college. So he concealed and revealed the knowledge in fictional form. Only those for whom the knowledge is intended will find it. William Seward Hall, the man of many faces and many pen names of many times and places, how dull it is to pause, to make a rest, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, pilgrim of adversity and danger, shame and sorrow, the traveler, the scribe, most hunted and fugitive of men, since the knowledge unfolding in his being spells ruin to our enemies. He will soon be in a position to play the deadliest trick of them all. The piper pulled down the sky, his hand will not hesitate. He has no capture and torture, abject fear and shame and humiliation that burn like acid. His hand will not hesitate to use the sword he is forging, an anti-magnetic artifact that cuts word and image to fragments. The Council of Transmigrants in Wagdas had attained such a skill in the art of prophecy that they were able to chart a life from birth to death, and so can he unplot and unwrite. Oh, it may take a few hundred years before some people find out they have been unwritten and unplotted into random chaos." Okay.
amazing.
Moving along. Yeah.
It's like a more menacing, sociopathic American glass speed game.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. Yes, yes. Yeah, I think there's something to that for sure. Now, let me do my little spiel on the Western lands. Again, from this literariness article, I do highly recommend if you're interested in specific works like Burroughs wrote a lot. And so if you're like, I want to, I'm going to get a sense of what one might appeal to me the most. There's books we haven't talked about. The Wild Boys is quite good. Naked Lunch, obviously, if you haven't read that, is a cool place to start and a pretty quick read. But this article on literariness.org by Nasrullah, what was this person's name? Um, Nasrullah, Nasrullah Mambrel. So the Western Lands, quote, in the third book of the trilogy, The Western Lands, the reader learns that Carson's was not shot by his opponent Mike Chase, but by a killer from the land of the dead named Joe, described as a natural outlaw, those are in caps, N-O, whose job it is to break natural laws. Excuse me. The Western Land itself is a mythical place, a utopian vision of a place beyond one's images of earth and heaven, a land where natural law, religious law, and human law have no meaning. It is a paradise, but a paradise difficult to reach. Now, let me read a little bit more. This is actually from the summary on Goodreads. I feel like I'm sort of cheating here, but these books are so hard to distill into like a capsule that I can just hand you that it feels easier to like pick a few other people's capsules and see if I can get something to come out of them.
Well, you're bringing us into, I think, technically hour 6 here. So you are crushing it.
Yeah.
You're maybe slightly overcompensating for your egregious treatment of Burroughs on our first episode of Art of Darkness.
I am a little bit,
but that's great. I'm glad you're doing it. You're doing the definitive AOD treatment for this dude, and it has been an emotional journey. I am still riveted, and I don't think we're ever going to get to the bottom of this guy.
No,
great writer.
He is. And I wanted to make sure we try to do that justice too. And we're very close to the end here. I mean, you have to imagine when these books come out, he's an elderly man living in a well-appointed but modest little home in outside of Lawrence, Kansas, right? His life has been as much of an adventure as anybody's ever, but it's coming down, and he's trying to get the last book together. And he's done it. But it's wild. Let me read this. This is again about the Western Lands. The symbolic vehicle Burroughs uses here is ancient Egyptian mythology, a long-standing interest of his. The Western Lands of the title are the territory to which the Egyptians believed the souls of the dead made a hazardous pilgrimage in their quest for true immortality. The questers, Joe the Dead, Kim Carson's, who died in book 2, but it's about the afterlife in part, right? The scribe Nefertiti, Hassani Saba, who is the old man of the mountain, from whom the word assassin comes from, supposedly, travel through an unmistakably Burroughs-esque universe of appalling danger and otherworldly beauty. Now the back alleys of ancient Egypt, now bombed-out Berlin, now the old west of the Shootists. Their hallucinatory journeys express the author's belief that only through facing the most extreme dangers and testing the possibilities of biological mutation can man escape a dead-end world of blasted dreams and atomic finale. And presiding over all this is the haunting figure of the old writer who shares in the fate of his characters and being finally unable to write himself out of time and into space. Okay. Now, let me read a quick little thing from the bio about Burroughs talking about the Western Lands. Let's see here. He described the Western Lands to James Fox, quote, Chaucer-esque pilgrims, adolescents almost to a man, travel through the land of the dead, the frontier beyond time, learning how to deal with space conditions. See, part of the whole idea is like, we're going to go to space as a species, right? The water that we live in is time, and we're going to escape into space. I compare this to the transition from, he just says this. I compare this to the transition from water to land of the various transitional species. Burroughs said that astronauts hadn't really gone into space because they went into space in an aqua lung, and he said that there had to be a link. The creatures had to have an air-breathing potential before they made the transition. If not, it would have been suicide. I see that dreams are the lifeline to our possible biological and spiritual destiny. Dreams sometimes approximate space conditions. That's what the Western Lands is about. It is a book about the possibility of hybridization, the crossing of man and animals. He is on one in this thing, man. Burroughs, in the book Western Lands, creates Margaris Unlimited, an independent secret service loyal to no country with its own agenda to provide and support for anything that favors or enhances space programs, space exploration, simulation of space conditions, exploration of inner space, or expanding awareness. It is also the job of Margaris to extirpate anything going in the other direction, right? Space is both for him metaphorical as a place beyond control, but it's also literal in terms of physically going there at the same time. And I don't know that he ever really distills what he means by space. It's like a it's like a dream symbol that maybe that by understanding you will transcend into somehow. Let me read a couple things from the Western Lands. Um, and yeah, the Western Lands not only represents its Egyptian afterlife, right? And he follows in some ways ancient Egyptian mythology. So the Western Lands is not only the afterlife, but it's also symbolic of the overall what I think he would think of as like the spiritual evolution of mankind. Like, how do we transcend the trap that is life by somehow symbolically dying? Um, Here's a quote from the Western Lands. The road to the Western Lands is the most dangerous of all roads and, in consequence, the most rewarding. To know the road exists violates the human covenant. You are not allowed to confront fear, pain, and death, or to find out that the sacred human covenant was signed under pressure of fear, pain, and death. They can keep their covenant in case of being caught short with a million years of bullshit. To enter the Western Lands means leaving the covenant behind in the human outhouse with the monkey ward catalogs. Now, I'm going to read. This is, if you really are dead set on reading this, and I hope somebody out there does, I hope some of you do, and I'm curious to hear people's thoughts about this. I'm going to read literally the last page last page of the Western Lands. It's his last work of fiction. So this is literally Burroughs' last page of fiction. He has some other books come out after this, but most of them are essays and collected journals and that sort of thing. Quote, I want to reach the Western Lands right in front of you, across the bubbling brook. It's a frozen sewer. It's known as the Duod, remember? All the filth and horror, fear, hate, disease, and death of human history flows between you and the Western Lands. Let it flow. My cat Fletch stretches behind me on the bed. He actually had a cat named Fletch, right? So this is like him. A tree like black lace against a gray sky, a flash of joy. How long does it take a man to learn that he cannot want what he wants? You have to be in hell to see heaven. Glimpses from the land of the dead, flashes of serene, timeless joy, a joy as old as suffering and despair. The old writer couldn't write anymore because he had reached the end of words, the end of what can be done with words. And then, British we are, British we stay. How long can one hang on in Gibraltar with the tapestries where mustached riders with scimitars hunt tigers, the ivory balls one inside the other, bare seams showing, the long tea room with mirrors on both sides, and the tired fuchsia and rubber plants, the shops selling English marmalade and Fortnum and Mason's tea, clinging to their rock like the rock apes, clinging always to less and less. In Tangier, the parade bar is closed. Shadows are falling on the mountain. Hurry up, please. It's time. The end. So, as I said, once he moves to Lawrence, Kansas, it's sort of a slow decline from 1981 to 1997. Especially after the Cities trilogy is complete. He's kind of done as a writer. He starts making more money, as I said before, selling his shotgun art to various galleries and collectors buying them. He's spending quite a bit of time doing that. He's having a lot of friends over. One thing I didn't mention about Burroughs is Burroughs maybe never cooked a meal for himself in his entire life. When he had money, he would go out, like every meal ever, right? Could you imagine just literally think about living
just like
80 years and never
the
cooking a meal?
worst trust fund kid. ever.
Right, right.
He's the king. You
Yeah,
can't outdo him. I don't care. I don't care if
no,
you're in a loft in Bushwick. I don't
yeah,
care. You're in a polycule in a
yeah,
Bushwick loft. You're
yeah,
never gonna top this dude.
yeah. He had a polycule going before that was even a word,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
Um, but in these later years, he's having a lot of friends over. There's a sort of rotating cast of Lawrence friends and Lawrence who will come and cook him dinner and hang out. He's drinking every day. He drinks as an old man. He's drinking a pint of vodka. He drinks a vodka and Coke. He's drinking about a pint a day. He's on methadone. He's taking methadone every morning. To sort of for people who don't know, methadone is basically a somewhat less narcotic version of it's an opiate, but it's a somewhat less narcotic version, and it serves as sort of a placeholder for people who have addiction to heroin and that sort of a thing. Um, and some people can manage to just live on that for a long period of time, and it doesn't quite lead to the spiraling that opiates can. Um, he has a triple bypass in the early 1990s, and now he's an elderly man. 1992, he has a sweat lodge ceremony with a Navajo elder from the Four Corners area of New Mexico. He finds this to be highly effective. He thinks it helps him understand, if not totally get rid of the ugly spirit. And he finds it more healing than all the years of therapy that he did. At some point in the mid 90s, he writes in his journal something like, um, I wish I had it in front of me, but I'm just remembering it now. He says something like, "It occurs to me, and I don't know what to do with this, that I'm actually a very fortunate and happy man." Um, and it seems like a surprise to him, which there's something charming about that to me. Like an old man puttering around. He gets very into his cats. Starts with strays, and then he has a bunch of cats, and he becomes an old cat lady. Um, but many people say that, after the sweat lodge and as he gets older, his heart kind of opened. He started to really listen to people instead of just sort of holding court, which had been more of his style. He seemed to feel it more distinctly when people died. I mean, people had been dying in his life and in his orbit all the time, but it seemed like a bigger deal to him.
Hmm.
Um, but his health is gradually failing. He has cataracts. They said the triple bypass. Allen Ginsberg dies April of 1997, dies before Burroughs, and they'd sort of sorted out some of the differences that they'd had in life. Burroughs appears in 1997. He appears in a U2 promotional video. And it's kind of for the band U2. And it's kind of funny. He'd apparently never seen U2 written down anywhere. And in his journals, he spells out YOUTOO. Something about film the YOUTOO video today. Or it's just a funny old man moment. Um, uh, his cat Fletch dies, the cat that he mentions in the Western Lands dies, and he takes it very hard. It seems to him like an encapsulation of all the death. It's like this cat dies, and suddenly he's mourning everybody he knows who died: his mom, his dad, Joan, Alan, various friends he's known along the way, all of these people, Billy, right? He's sort of feeling all the death of them and of everybody in this cat. 3 days later, he has a heart attack, gets picked up in an ambulance, and he says to a friend who happens to be there when it happens, he says, "I'll be back in no time." And a few hours later, he passes away. Um, I'm going to read uh, the last thing. There's a book that came out, the Final Journals of William S. Burroughs. I'm going to read the last thing. This might have been the last thing that he wrote. Um, quote, "Atom bomb is the ultimate soul killer that vaporizes all debts as it vaporized the steel tower at Alamogordo, New Mexico. Our vegetable love will grow vaster than empires and more slow." No idea where or why that quote came from. Know the whole poem, of course, brain littered up with old bits and pieces. "Pieces of eight," screamed a parrot. "Wouldn't you, if you were a parrot, had learned how?" Felicity Mason describing me to someone holding tickets I needed. Quote, "When you see someone who looks like the saddest man in the world, that's him. How can a man who sees and feels be other than sad? To see Ginger," that's a cat, "always weaker and older. The price of immortality, of course. Well, you should have thought of these things." I did. Thinking is not enough. Nothing is. There is no final enough of wisdom, experience, any fucking thing. No holy grail, no final satori, no final solution, just conflict. Only thing can resolve conflict is love. Like I felt for Fletch and Rusky and Spooner and Calico. Pure love. What I feel for my cats, present and past. Love? What is it? Most natural painkiller what there is. And that was the life and work of William S. Burroughs. And of course, we'll be back to talk about other things, but yes. Kevin's
Just
shooting
one
me.
shot. Phew. Banger. Good job,
Yeah.
Brad. That was
Thanks,
awesome. That
man.
was that really kicks off season 4. We've already
Yes.
technically begun the season, but that really kicks it off.
Indeed. Indeed.
Lovely job. Thank
Thanks,
you for
man.
doing the work. What would Burroughs be doing now? What do we think? We've already answered it, but let's do it one more time.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's remembered most as a writer, but I think it's important to think of him as a very much like a multimedia artist. And so I think he may have continued writing, but he also may have gotten more into video. He might have needed some help with the technical aspects, but I think he would have been seeing new manifestations of control through our technology, and I think he would have been looking for ways to disrupt it in some way, whatever that might mean. Um, making he might be, he's an interesting guy because he might have gotten like really into deep fakes, but his point of deep fakes was to like not to make a porn of a woman of a celebrity or something, but to like actually disrupt your ability to get information, like really screw with the ability of the medium to control you. I don't know. That's what I think.
Lovely work. We're going to be back for the After Dark for Patreon. This is the core of what we do. And if you think
Yes.
that it's worth $5 a month, that's what it costs to get in the door. You get the book club, you get the After Darks. You give Brad and me the ability to buy the books we need.
Yeah.
The ability to go to Mexico City so we can
Drink with a bear.
Find the source of the ectoplasm. Really,
Yeah.
though, we don't blow money on trips.
No.
Truly, we really appreciate the support. Our existing supporters, thank you so much. We'll see you on the After Dark. Quick,
Yeah.
rattle off. What are we going to talk about when we come
We're
back?
going to talk about Burroughs and Scientology, what Burroughs did to try and communicate with the gray aliens, and we're going to read a little bit from the unpublished and rarely read William S. Burroughs archive, sent to us by friend of the show on Twitter at Old Man Telegram. Follow him.
And you can reach us at Art of Dark Pod and at Google or at Gmail, artofdarkpod@gmail.com. Okay, Brad, here we're going to end the episode. I got my little latte on the top of the head. Ready?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I knew that was going to happen. I knew that was going to happen, and I did it anyway, Kevin. Now it's off to Ecuador.